Welcome to our channel. Today, we delve into the chilling realm of horror stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. So dim the lights, grab a cozy blanket, and get ready for a thrilling ride through tales that will haunt your dreams. Are you ready to face your fears? This happened to me during my freshman year of college in 2018. I'm graduated now, but I often think about it during Halloween week. My college had crazy parties daily. I attended a big school, so there were always fraternity costume parties, and even the bars made people dress up. It gets pretty wild, lots of booze, lots of police, and lots of memories. This event happened to me on the Saturday of Halloween week. Our football team had a huge win that day, and my friends and I were going to this one particular fraternity off campus to celebrate the victory. We knew about this because one of my friends, Felicia, was dating a guy on the team. We got to the frat party around 11 o'clock, and things got pretty crazy. Everyone was getting drunk really fast, and we were all booing the school that we beat in different chants while the music blasted. I was taking shots and dancing with all my friends, having a blast. It's critical to note that my phone had died during this time. I had given it to Felicia to put in her purse. Later, I told my friends that I had to go to the bathroom and to wait for me by the DJ booth. We were all pretty intoxicated at this point. While I was in the bathroom peeing, I heard some frat brother in the house scream, "Cops," at the top of his lungs, and people started screaming and scrambling to get out of the house. I sprinted out of the frat house and was greeted by multiple cop cars and lights flashing. People were sprinting in different directions. Some cops were already talking to the frat brothers, while others were trying to catch underage people. In my intoxicated state, I realized I didn't have my phone. I started yelling out for my friends while avoiding the cops. Realizing I wasn't going to be able to find them in the crowd, I decided to start making my way home, even though I wasn't entirely sure how to get home. This frat house was pretty far off campus in a different part from other frats. I started making my trek home, and it was absolutely freezing, even though it was only October. It was like 37 degrees that night. I'm still heavily tipsy but conscious of everything around me. After a while, I knew I needed a break to warm up and hopefully sober up. I saw a building that looked like one of the academic buildings I'd heard about, so I approached it, opened the door, and stepped inside. It was pretty dark in there, but a few exit signs at different door entrances illuminated a decent portion of the inside. After 5 minutes, I started to sober up a little bit and realized I wasn't in an academic building. I was in a warehouse. I was much warmer, but I became nervous about the eerie feeling around me. I went to open the door, and a pit sank in my stomach. It was locked. How could it have been locked from the inside? I started to make my way towards a door near the exit sign. I pushed it open and went through, expecting it to lead me outside, but it led to another part of the building. This room was much smaller, illuminated by a low red light. There was a buzzing noise in the room from some machine. I could see chains hanging from the ceiling and steam in the room. I kid you not, it was like a typical horror movie scene. I went to turn around and go back through the door, but this door was also locked behind me. Sheer panic set in, and at this point, I was trying not to break down. I leaned up against the wall and slid down, silently crying. This is when I heard it, a door slam shut and footsteps. I instantly went silent and my eyes widened. I heard another door shut and more footsteps. They were getting closer to my area. I saw the door next to me, and as quietly as possible, I opened it and snuck through. I started wading through the hanging chains and the steam. I heard the door from the previous room open and the footsteps approaching, They were big, heavy footsteps. My fight or flight kicked in, and I came near a window. With all my might, I kicked it 5 times with my foot, shattering it. This was when I heard the feet running towards the door. I had maybe 10 seconds to spare. I leapt out the window, not even realizing that the other side of the building I was now on happened to be a high drop. I fell about 10 feet, landing on top of 2 recycling bins. I pushed myself off, shocked by the impact, and looked up at the window. It was shattered, and there was no one in the window frame. I dashed underneath some pine trees a few feet away, hiding myself in the shadows. When I looked back up, that's when I saw a figure looking out the window, looking in all directions for me. My whole body went numb with fear. As quietly as I could, I snuck across the street and ran. I ran for my life as fast as I could until I recognized the side of campus my dorm was on. I got back to my dorm, and my friends were waiting for me outside, panicked and freaking out. They told me I had been gone for almost 4 hours. The following day, I told them about my experience. My friends' mouths hung open as they listened to me talk. After further discussion, I discovered that it was a building that hadn't been used in several years. The pit in my stomach hit me again. Whoever was in the building wasn't a cop, he wasn't night security. This was some random person after me. It still makes me sick to this day. If I hadn't been quieter or thought as quickly, I could be dead. Even though I tried to find out information, nothing came up. It still remains the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I'm an 18-year-old female and I've been stalked quite a few times in my life, but thankfully most of the perpetrators were more annoying than scary, though these 2 individuals never got to bloom into full stalkers due to the fact that I moved out of state. They were easily the creepiest individuals I'd ever met. I'd begun attending community college, and in an effort to make friends, I joined an anime club. Once a month, we'd scrape together enough money for pizza and soda and reserve a room in the library, then spend a day watching everyone's favorites. Everything was great until the second meeting. We watched Princess Mononoke and Kiki's Delivery Service and some other similar movies. Then Orson put in the last movie of the day. It was an animated softcore erotic video. None of us knew what to do. We were all kind of socially awkward. He sat through our movies quietly and politely, so were we supposed to do the same? We spent the hour and 20 minutes red-faced and casting each other horrified looks while Orson watched a disgusting lewd video with wicked attention. Finally, it was over, and then he turned around and asked, "So what did you guys think?" He was looking directly at me, and that was the first time I noticed that I was the only female in the anime club. Trying to be polite, I made a huge mistake. It was, interesting. I meant it to convey that his choice was interesting considering that we'd all brought in Disney movies, but he took it to mean I was fascinated with what he played for us. From that day on, he showed up everywhere I went on campus. The second I entered any sort of common room, there he was with his laptop, trying to show me more of these videos, seating himself way too close to me so we could both lean into his screen and watch it. Each time, I would tell him I didn't really like this show as politely as I could and move to another table, but he would move right back uncomfortably close to me and assure me that I would get into the story if I just watched. One day, he sat next to me and pulled out a notebook, showing me a drawing. It looked like a creepy robot uterus, but hoping I was wrong, I asked what it was, and it was a creepy robot uterus. He was writing a book about an AI sex toy that invades lady parts and turns them into ravening sex fiends willing to do anything for the deed. He wanted my opinions on his story, and I told him it wasn't really my kind of story. I tried to move again, but he followed and just kept asking really inappropriate questions in the name of research. Thankfully, at this point, Reggie, the boy who had brought me into the anime club, noticed that Orson was following me table by table through the lunchroom as my face was always red with embarrassment. He came over. Orson actually fled before he even spoke. It sort of seemed like Orson was afraid of Reggie, and thank God for that. Reggie was awesome and always in the lunchroom. All I had to do was hang out near his anti-Orson force field. Reggie played World of Darkness with his friends, and I had played all through high school. By proximity, I was eventually asked to join the game. I met with the storyteller, Ryder, and gave him my character sheet. He informed me that I could keep whatever stats I had, but I was going to be taking over the role of Jenny, a long-standing NPC. I asked who Jenny was, but was only told I'd get a huge kick out of it. So I attended, waiting for him to introduce me to the team. They were playing the game in a CD strip club setting. Everyone looked bored but Ryder and a player named Kane. I didn't know Kane, but he was huge and creepy, with an intense, unblinking stare that was always focused either on Ryder or me. I started to get a bad feeling. Then Ryder announces that Jenny the hooker has arrived to service Kane's character. He turns right to me and grins. Kane's staring focus locks onto me. Ryder eventually relents, sulking. I finished that game and showed up for one more, but Ryder insisted on sexualizing my character and Kane just sat there across from me, both games, breathing heavily and glaring. I quit the game, but Kane started following me. He never really spoke to me, just sat across the room from me glaring and snorting with Orson. They were friends, of course they were. I had to abandon the cafeteria entirely because while Orson was creeping, I was pretty sure Kane was dangerous, and he wasn't afraid of Reggie. Also, it really looked like Orson was encouraging him to do something while they stared at me, whispering. I left the state at the end of the semester, but I kept in touch with Reggie. About 7 years later, I married him. When I brought up all the crazy things that happened back when we met, he told me that actually, everyone was afraid of Kane, particularly Ryder. They tried to disband the game because all Kane wanted to do was rent fake hookers, but he made veiled threats that he might do something insane if they stopped playing with him. To this day, I think Ryder was offering me to Kane the same way you offer the crazy guy at the office a Snickers, just in the off chance that if he does do something drastic, he won't do it to you. I'm not going to lie, I basically went to college to smoke weed and go to parties. My full intention was to do just enough to get by while partying as much as I could. Unfortunately, though, for me, I only applied to a few schools and was only accepted to one, a small college in the mountains of New Hampshire. It was very small, around 3,500 total undergrads, and I went not knowing anybody. On the first day, as I was skipping the ice-breaking games and other students were giving tours of the campus to their families before leaving, I wandered down a small path behind the cafeteria toward a small stream that I had noticed during the drive-in. I lit a joint, and I was just meandering around when I noticed another dude a little further down the stream that cut a straightish path through the trees. He was also smoking a joint, I assumed, at least by the way he was holding it. So I made my way over to see if I just made my first college friend and introduce myself. His name was Louis, and he seemed pretty cool. He was smoking some really nice herbs, so I figured I could get along with him. He only stood at about 5 feet 5 inches, and he was also a little stubby, but I remember noticing that he had a really weird laugh, like a nervous type. Whenever he laughed, he'd kind of look off to the side and then glance back at me from his peripheral vision. Yeah, I knew it was kind of weird back then for being the first time I'd met him, literally the first 30 seconds of introducing myself. But I just thought maybe he was socially awkward, had bad teeth, or who knows. I was taught not to judge, and he was otherwise normal. We ended up hanging out fairly frequently, playing video games, drinking, and smoking. But other people, especially in my dorm, didn't really seem to take to him, not that I really felt a strong connection with him. I didn't. It was a very superficial friendship built around drugs and debauchery, but I definitely got the sense that my other friends weren't comfortable around him. Then something weird happened that I've managed to successfully forget about until just very recently. My heart is pumping out of my chest just typing this. One weekend, my roommate was home for a visit, and Louis's roommate was having his girlfriend over, which basically implied in college terms that Louis was staying with me. It kind of just seemed automatic. We got trashed, smoked a ton, got pizza, and played video games. I was pretty out of it, and we were both sitting in desk chairs in my room, passing a bowl back and forth. When he handed the bowl to me, leaning toward me in his chair, he put his hand over my hand and casually in a low, steady voice said, "I'm going to kill you." Okay, so like I said, we were all sorts of up, but I was definitely freaked out a little. He'd never really been aggressive before, even at his most intoxicated, and he certainly never said anything like this before. I've never handled confrontation very well, so all I said was, "Dude, don't do that, bro," and I sort of just laughed it off. I tried to write it off as a drunk, stoned idiot playing too much Mortal Kombat. We had a bunk bed set up in the room since it was pretty small, and I was on the top. My roommate was a bigger guy and didn't want to have to climb down to pee in the middle of the night. We had both gone to bed, but my roommate had put up Christmas lights that we always kept on, strung along the ceiling. I'm half deaf, I should add, and when I sleep, I tend to roll onto my functioning ear to block out sounds or maybe muffle them in the pillow. This also means that I'm a pretty heavy sleeper. But sometime during the night, I woke up feeling a little nauseous and slowly opened my eyes. Louis was standing on the edge of the mattress, holding on to the side railings of my top bunk and staring directly at my face as I was sleeping. My eyes grew wide as I snapped awake and sat up. "What the hell, dude?" I said, backing up and bumping my head on the wall behind me. Then he turned his head and gave me that look from the corners of his eyes, the same smile and laugh that freaked me out the first day I met him. He was still holding the railings, standing on the mattress from the lower bunk, with his face lit in weird splashes of color from the Christmas lights. He took one hand from the railing, put his finger to his mouth while smiling and still looking at me sideways, and whispered, "Shoo," before hopping down and leaving the room. It was like 3 a.m., and I don't know where he went that night. I never told anyone about that, and I pretty much did my best to bury it and never think about it again. I avoided Louis for the rest of the year, making up excuses when he wanted to chill alone, but I did end up at the same parties with him a few times. We never talked about it, though. He never brought it up. I transferred to another school the following year, not because of Louis or anything, just financial reasons. I did manage to forget about that weird incident, but that was 15 years ago. I'm 33 now and recently got a call from my old roommate from the school in New Hampshire, who luckily remembered my very repetitive phone number. I actually made a song out of it that's really easy to remember, and I've never changed the number. "Man, remember that guy Louis that you used to hang out with at the dorms? He killed his 2 friends with a hunting knife and fishing line on a camping trip a year ago," he said. He said he was too screwed up to control himself, supposedly, and he was mixing his meds with booze and drugs. They said he just lost it. The thing that messes with me is wondering if he told them he was going to kill them like he did me, and that the last thing they saw was that sideways smile that I saw when I woke up that night. This takes place during the first week of school, my freshman year at the University of Iowa. I was just starting to get comfortable with my roommate. He was dedicated to the idea of rushing a fraternity, and rush week was starting the next week. But the parties were starting Thursday of the first week. My roommate didn't want to go alone because it would be harder to meet people that way, so he wanted me to go. I happily agreed to go with him, even though I had no interest in rushing a fraternity. I still had intentions to go to parties. After all, I was attending a party school. My roommate wanted to go to one frat party on Thursday and then parties at different frat houses on Friday and Saturday. On this Thursday night, we were headed to perhaps one of the lowest ranked frats. I'm pretty sure it was an underground one too, but his logic in attending was to have a backup frat in case the higher ones wouldn't give him a bid. The frat house was really far from campus and in a much more slummy downtown area. We pulled up to a corner house, and if it weren't for the blasting music and cars parked everywhere, we would never have pictured this house as a frat house. It literally looked like they settled with the first house they found. We knocked on the door to immediately be greeted by some short, chubby guy in a white t-shirt holding a solo cup. His shirt had sweat stains by his armpits and mid-belly area. He told us to come right in. The party itself was in a horribly dimly lit room with probably 50 guys bunched up into the living room. It was hot as hell in there. To make it even worse, I think I saw maybe 2 girls at the entire party, neither of them even close to attractive. I gave the party a good 20 minutes, talking with one overweight foreigner after another, all giving off anti-social vibes. Eventually, I waved for my roommate to get ready to leave, but a huge group of guys by the door made us decide to wait a little longer to avoid the awkwardness of leaving early. I continued to drink the cheap beers they were serving. I think I downed 5 cups before I could even feel a buzz. A heavy guy approached me with a tiny bottle in his hand and handed it to me, smirking and saying, "That'll get you shit-faced." I fake laughed and thanked him, expecting him to go away, but he just watched me as if he were waiting for me to drink it. So I did. It was maybe 2 shots worth of some kind of hard liquor. The guy then started making conversation with me, and every time I hinted that I was trying to get away, he would try to pull me further into this otherwise one-sided conversation. Things started to get really blurry pretty soon. I remember feeling dizzy all of a sudden, and the room seemed to be getting darker. That was the last thing I remember before waking up in a dark room, lying in a bed. I could hear the sound of music muffled behind closed doors, so I knew I was still in the frat house. It was a very dark room, however. I could still make out certain furniture in the room and a small closet door, not much else. But even over the blaring music, I heard the sound of a plastic bag being crunched from the closet as if somebody had stepped on it by mistake. I ran out of that room and down the stairs back to the overcrowded living room. I found my roommate and pushed him out the front door, past the group of guys still standing in a circle right next to it. During the car ride back to campus, I told my roommate I was drugged. He almost called the cops, but I said it would be foolish and pointless. My roommate then asked me an awkward question: was I taken advantage of? I didn't feel any type of pain, and my clothes were all still on, so I assumed not. When I did a time check, I realized I'd only been out for maybe 10 minutes before waking up. Whatever the guy gave me must have been a dud or something. Thank God. That was my college experience of attending an underground ghetto frat party, and it remains my scariest life experience. My name is Kieran. I graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, in 2015. My college experience was perfect. I was part of a frat, I managed my studies well, and spent just the right amount of time chasing girls. I'm actually still friends with a lot of my old frat brothers, and I recently got engaged to my fiancée Kaylee, whom I also met at Berkeley. If you had asked me my opinion of Berkeley when I was a freshman, though, I can assure you that my answer would be very, very different. What I'm about to tell you was one of the main reasons why I was never overly ambitious in high school. The Berkeley atmosphere was extremely foreign to me, and it was weird being surrounded by so many self-proclaimed high achievers. As a freshman, I was quickly swept up into the frenzy of career development and planning the next 30 years of your life as an 18-year-old. Silly, I know, but that was the nature of my school at the time. If you wanted to get any sort of offer in the business world, having a strong LinkedIn profile was a necessity. I can still remember the stress of cultivating a professional image online as if my future hinged on which people I connected with and what skills I listed. Regardless, I checked all the boxes and began my search for a summer internship. It wasn't long before my inbox chimed with an actual meaningful message. To my genuine surprise, a prestigious business firm had reached out to me, expressing interest in my profile. It wasn't one of those bot messages either. The substance of the message indicated that this was actually a unique message designed specifically for me. I read it over like 6 times before finally responding, and after about a day of brief correspondence, I was invited to a first-round interview. I spent hours researching the company so I'd know what to expect come the interview and prepped myself with all the sample questions I could find. I soon got a message from a guy named Leonard Slawinski. I'll never forget that name for as long as I live. He stated that he was to be my interviewer. And naturally, the first thing I did was do some background research on the guy. However, excitement soon gave way to puzzlement. I scoured LinkedIn for Leonard's profile, expecting to glean some insight into the person I'd soon be meeting. Strangely, I found nothing, no trace of their professional footprint, no social media. Nothing. I shrugged it off, attributing it to perhaps a preference for privacy or something like that. Leonard and I agreed on a day and time, and he gave me the interview location. I searched it up on my phone and realized that it was some random coffee shop in Oakland. This is when I started getting confused. Why would an interview not take place in Berkeley? We had tons of coffee shops and perfect places for interviews in our college town, so I was just perplexed. The address online seemed pretty normal, though, so I didn't think much of it. A day before the interview, I told my friend Marcus about the situation. He was even more confused than I was, telling me that the situation seemed fishy. I agreed with him, but I figured it was worth it for the position I might be getting. He asked me how I was getting there, and I told him I was Ubering. He offered to give me a ride as he wasn't doing anything at the time. I thanked him and took him up on his offer. Little did I know, I might not even be telling the story if he hadn't offered to drive me. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon the next day, and Marcus rolled up to my dorm. Admittedly, I was extremely nervous, and this was one of my first interviews. I got in the car, and we were off. 30 minutes later, I told Marcus to drop me off on the street as I didn't want to be seen having a friend drop me off for an interview. I thanked him, and he offered to wait for me. I asked him if he was sure, and he smirked, pulling out a big bag of weed from inside of his dashboard. I left then, shut the door, and walked a couple of minutes to the location. Frozen in my tracks, I looked up at the literal construction site in front of me. There was no coffee shop. Even stranger, this entire area wasn't residential at all. All the buildings looked closed or private. Confused, I double-checked my phone and confirmed that I was in the right location. This entire block must have been recently demolished, so recently that even Google Maps hadn't updated. I pulled out my phone to call Marcus, but before I could, a booming voice rang out behind me. "Kieran!" exclaimed a deep voice. I whipped around and was met with the appearance of an absurdly tall man wearing an expensive-looking black suit. Thank God, I thought, grateful that this whole ordeal hadn't been some kind of setup. His presence was commanding yet oddly out of place amidst the derelict surroundings. I should also note that the car he was standing next to was a matte black Bentley. He walked toward me with a confused look on his face. We shook hands, and when I asked him about the construction site, he said he was just as surprised as I was. He furrowed his eyebrows and put his hand on his chin. "You know what, why don't we find someplace else?" "Get in," he said, motioning towards the Bentley. He walked back to the car and shouted over his shoulder, "Shotgun's all yours." Without another word, he got in the front seat and shut the door. Excitedly, I followed. I walked around the car just to admire it a little and couldn't help but glance into the back seat. I expected to see the beautiful leather seats that you would expect in a Bentley, but instead, my eyes met a sight that sent a chill down my spine. Lying flat on the ground, obscured by the shadows, was a man. In his hand, he held something long and metal. Panic surged within me, my mind racing with the implications of what lay before me. This was a trap. I turned away from the car and ran as fast as I had ever run before. I heard the man yell my name from behind me, but I didn't even turn around to look. As I ran, I heard the one sound I was dreading, screeching tires. I shot a glance over my shoulder and saw the car turning around, pointing in my direction. I had to think quickly. There was no way I was going to outrun a car. It wasn't like I could just escape the situation. There wasn't really any open space around me, just an endless maze of streets. I could feel the terror coursing through my veins. I made it to the next intersection and faced a choice that may have decided my fate, left or right. Logic told me to just turn left as it was closer, but my feet chose for me before my brain could. I sprinted across the street to the right and darted down the road. I knew I didn't have long, 10, maybe 20 seconds at most. As if by some miracle, one of the buildings in front of me had a fire escape that looked just low enough to jump onto. With every ounce of strength I had, I vaulted myself upwards, grabbing onto the ladder. I had never done a pull-up in my life, but in my mind, this was life or death. I made it up the ladder and kept climbing. The Bentley whipped around the corner and stopped on the street in front of the building. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew he was looking at me. There was nothing else I could do. If they chose to follow me, I'd just have to fight. The next minute felt like an eternity. The car stood there a little while longer and then accelerated down the street, turning left to never be seen again. I couldn't breathe. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus, basically screaming into the phone about what happened. I stayed on the fire escape until he found me. I got in the car, and we sped off in silence. The aftermath of this whole thing was pretty uneventful. I sort of blocked it out of my brain and refused to talk about it, even with Marcus. As far as I was concerned, it never happened. But as much as I tried, there are times, like right now, when I can't help but recall every horrifying detail of what could have been the last day of my life. I went to Binghamton University for 2 years. I quickly made a big group of friends there, and we'd go out every weekend. One weekend, on a Friday night in October, when my group didn't have any big plans together, me and two other close friends decided to hang out in the school nature preserve by the lake. There was this little clearing on the far side of the lake that was convenient for fires since it was so far from the view of the school or campus security. Kids would sometimes, but not often, come here to smoke pot, drink, and do basically all the other drugs. It was a relatively unknown spot on campus for most, and we liked that about it. Tonight, we just brought a bunch of beers, lit a fire, and hung out, having what we referred to at the time as a brochette. As the night progressed, time seemed to pass quicker as the alcohol began to take effect. Eventually, it got to the point where we were all laughing so hard that one of my two friends was on the floor, rolling in the leaves. That was when my other friend stopped laughing and went, "Shoo." We all perked up and listened, hearing the crunching of leaves and branches in the distance. We threw our bottles in the lake since we were all under 21, and it wasn't unheard of for campus police to come through the woods on weekends to catch kids doing drugs. We tucked the rest of the beers into a backpack. I was moderately drunk, so my paranoia was higher than usual. That was probably the case for all of us. The fire exposed us to anyone passing through the woods, but the thing is, this spot was so unknown and far from campus that it was rare to find anybody else that deep into the woods. It sounded like just one person in the distance. The sound of a tree branch snapping not too far away freaked all of us out. None of us were really the confrontational ones from our group, so we were lacking that one person who would have the confidence to stand up and yell out to whoever was out there. Instead, we all just sat in silence, shushing each other. We heard what seemed to be somebody or something circling us, or at least walking around in a C shape around our little campsite. It literally started to feel like we were in the movie The Blair Witch Project, because these sounds in the near distance, like cracking tree branches and leaves crunching on the ground, kept echoing over to our campsite. We laughed about it at first, but I personally soon became terrified of who or what it could be. Out of the blue, a huge thud made all three of us jump. At first, I didn't understand, even though I saw what caused the sound. It took me a few seconds to digest the fact that a branch had been thrown into the center of our little fireside. One of my two friends took off running, while my other friend and I sat behind, looking at each other, half laughing, half concerned. I felt like we didn't know yet if this was some kind of joke or not. Then my friend let out a scream of pain as he was struck in the face by another tree branch. I grabbed the backpack, helped my friend up off the floor, and we hauled ass back in the direction of our dorm. When we made it to the road separating the nature preserve from our dorm, we stopped to catch our breath. But whoever was out there proved to be following us when we heard footsteps coming closer to the road. We continued to run back to the dorm, and when we got back to our floor, we found our other friend in his room already. We looked out of his room window down to the woods. There was someone pacing back and forth by the woods, and every time a car passed, they would walk back into the woods. Eventually, whoever it was went back into the woods for good, never to be seen again by us. We continued our drinking session in the dorm room, and within 10 minutes, we were all laughing about it. It wasn't until the next morning that we all realized how terrifying that experience actually was. We never really went back into the woods past dark after that. I never shared this story with anyone. I was always too afraid to be judged for it, so it's something I buried deep down until my friend brought it up the other day. We both have daughters now, and we were talking about how we could educate them on being safe when they're teenagers and start experimenting with partying. When my best friend and I were 17 years old, we went to the beach for spring break with a couple of our guy friends. My friend was talking to this guy that she had met through mutual friends, and he wanted us to meet up with him at a house that he and his friends had rented together. Our guy friends had ditched us to meet girls, so we decided to go ahead and go to her friend's house to hang out with them. When we got there, it was still the middle of the day, and we were taken inside and introduced to everyone. It turns out that almost all the guys were on a basketball team at the same university. We all hung out, and they were all drinking, but my friend and I were not. One guy came out with 2 glasses of what appeared to be whiskey and coke. Against my better judgment, I started to sip it, as did my friend. There was one guy who appeared to be not athletic, and he was the only person at the house who was not being friendly toward us. I'll call him Vincent. Suddenly, I started to feel very buzzed. We were laughing and talking, and one guy asked me to put on his jersey. I grabbed it and put it on over my clothes. "No, take your clothes off and put it on," he said in an aggressive tone. I was feeling more tipsy at this point, and I knew something was wrong. Our parents had let us drink with them multiple times, so I knew what it was like to be drunk. I knew how much I could handle before I was drunk, and one drink never made me feel like I was getting wasted. "Hey, quit babysitting that drink. Drink up, weakling," one guy said as they all laughed. Even though I had stopped drinking, I still kept feeling more and more buzzed, especially since our drink barely tasted of any whiskey. My dad always had whiskey at home, and we would drink a couple of whiskey Pepsis on occasion. I would feel relaxed, but this was much different. "We should go. Our friends are waiting for us," I said as I headed to the door, and a couple of guys stood in front of us. "No, no, no, not so fast. You can't leave. Come sit down over here for a little bit," they said as they ushered us back to the couch. This sinking feeling hit my gut, and I just knew that we were on borrowed time. Trying to stay calm, I laughed and said, "I need to pee. Come with me," as I grabbed my friend's hand and we went into the restroom together. We both stood there, and we had already read each other's minds. I put my hands on her head and looked her in the eyes so we could both focus. "We need to leave right now," I said. Our phones both had spotty service, and I'm guessing because there were so many people packed on it. "Take my keys. Tell them you are going to get your purse, and I'll stay here. You go get the guys and come back for me." I knew this plan probably wouldn't work, but my mind was going crazy, and we had to try something. As I opened the bathroom door, Vincent was standing there, and my heart sank. He was rude to us earlier, and he probably heard us talking. "Hey, follow me and be quiet." Something inside me trusted him with everything I had in that moment. We followed him down the hallway to a garage and out to the front driveway. "Hurry up, get out of here now," he said. We ran to the car, and I drove off to our hotel. I remember driving, but I don't remember getting to our condo. The rest of the story is from our guy friends telling us what happened. Apparently, we walked into them, and the guys asked us where we had been because it was already nighttime, and we were supposed to meet up to barbecue some hot dogs. They said we didn't say a word and that we just walked to our room, closed the door, and passed out. We didn't come until the next day, and both of us had excruciating headaches as if we had drunk a whole bottle of cheap vodka by ourselves. Thank you, Vincent. I wish I could thank you. I hope you're out there hearing this, and you remember the brunette and blonde little girls that you saved that day on the island. This story happened almost 10 years ago, late summer 2006. I was an 18-year-old freshman in college. I went to a tiny college at the opposite end of the state I lived in. I lived in the basement and ground floor of an old dorm. My floor was men only, but the floors above us were women, and then the other side of the dorm was all men. I have some stories that are sort of creepy, but this one takes the cake. At the time, it didn't really click as that creepy. Hindsight is 2020. I was young, naive, and full of you-know-what. I was in the best shape of my life at 6 feet 2 inches, 180 pounds, and handsome. I'm 10 years older now, though, and I put on 100 plus pounds. I was a young, good-looking college guy in my dorm. There was a communal bathroom for all 20 guys to share, 2 stalls, 2 urinals, and 2 showers. That was it. One of the showers had an air vent that was about 7 feet up, but on the outside, it came out on the ground level. Well, one hot summer day, I'm taking a shower and just talking and joking with the guy in the next shower behind me. All of a sudden, I hear someone else talking to me. I think that maybe someone has come into the bathroom and wants to use a shower or something. That thought quickly leaves my head as I realize that the air vent has been opened, and the dorm's maintenance man and janitor is now looking at me through the vent. This guy was 50 years old and looked like the actor Clint Howard, the ugly redneck guy in a lot of Adam Sandler's 90s comedies. He had a thick Appalachian accent. He somehow knew my name. I don't remember ever giving it to him, but I had said hello to him a few times. He was also trying to make small talk. It was very weird. I mean, I was weirded out by the college janitor peeping on me and then trying to start a conversation while I was showering, but for some reason at the time, it didn't really register that what he was doing was super creepy and illegal. I just thought he was being weird, and I politely asked him to close the vent. The guy in the shower next to me told me that the janitor did that all the time and he thought it was weird and creepy too, but harmless. I guess it was a huge joke that the best time to shower was later at night until the perverted janitor tried watching and started making conversation. It was apparently a common occurrence on my floor. My floor was mostly made up of the freshman football players. I was not one of them, and I guess the janitor liked to talk to these guys about the team in football through the air vent while watching them. I still shudder at that thought. I would see the janitor occasionally around the dorm after that, but I never experienced him spying on me again, thankfully. I also never told the resident life or college administration about the janitor doing these creepy things. I hope maybe someone spoke up one day and maybe he was fired, but who knows? This is a fresh story happening pretty recently. My family and I were driving to college to help me move in, as I'm currently a first-year student. Once we arrived, I found out that I would be living in a Jack and Jill, which means you and another room shared the same bathroom. So, essentially, I'd be living with 3 other guys. I already knew one of them in the other room. We met at orientation and got to know each other. His roommate doesn't matter for this story, though. It's my roommate, Walter, who I'm going to talk about. I got his socials beforehand, and we exchanged information prior to moving in. I tried talking to him on Instagram to get to know him better, but his replies seemed dry. On top of that, his profile seemed like one of those Discord mods that you see on Instagram Reels or TikTok. Once we moved in, I met him, and ironically, he looked like a Discord mod, except he had a skinny build around my height. He looked very pale and had a peach fuzz mustache. I tried talking to him again. His talking style matched his texting style and seemed very introverted. He stuttered a lot and always tried to end the conversation as quickly as possible. I tried to lighten him up by asking what kind of music he listens to, but he said he doesn't, as music wouldn't fill his cup of emptiness. To make things more weird, when he set up his PS5, he immediately started gaming. It's not him gaming that's weird, it's what he does when he games. Walter makes these weird grunting noises, violently shakes his body, and laughs when he spams the controller. He puts his feet in his desk cabinet, occasionally grabbing his feet and pulling them towards his body during his shakes. He also whispers to himself as he plays, whether by himself or with his online friends, and he usually repeats what he whispered twice in a giggly manner. He stays in the room 24/7 and almost never does homework. His movements alone freak me out as I'm trying to sleep, but there's more to the story. Sometime around the first week, I went out with some friends that I met in my dorm building, and I came back pretty late to my dorm. Around 1 a.m. Walter looked asleep in his bed, so I nudged it off as I went to my cabinet, which was right next to my bed. I felt my arm hairs get goosebumps and felt the urge to turn around, so I did. Walter was staring right at me with a slight grin on his face. I yelped and said, "Holy, Walter, why are you looking at me like that?" He laughed it off and said, "Dark time," and turned around to face the wall. This creeped me out, and it happened, I want to say, 3 more times. I tried to move out, but my college said they didn't have any dorms open, so I tried to move into the other room, but one of the other roommates didn't want to leave as well. This meant I was stuck with Walter for the semester, and I just had to deal with it. About 3 months passed by, and I came back from my English class. When I opened the door to my dorm, Walter stood up in a panic, asking me why I was back so early. This was weird, as my English class actually ended late, hence me getting back late. I asked him if he needed the room to himself, and he declined, striking some weird pose that looked like it was from some anime. He said that I shouldn't be worried at all. I visibly cringed at him, and his statement only made me more uncomfortable. I noticed he had a box on his desk, and when I brought it up, he told me that it wasn't important. I shrugged it off. At this time, I noticed that my iPhone charger and my scissors were missing. I asked Walter if he had seen them, and he said he had. He handed me the scissors, and as he was handing me the iPhone charger, the cable knocked his box over to me as well. The box opened, and what I saw made my heart sink. A sticky note with my name on it fell out. Alongside this was what looked to be a see-through case. Inside it were eyelashes, a pair of glasses, a pair of my socks, and a disposable photo of me that I took as a joke. He collected all of it up off the floor as he tried explaining the meaning of it, and I yelled at him to get out. He left immediately. I texted my RA about the situation, and he told me that he was out at the moment, but when he came back tomorrow, I should show him the box as evidence so that they would have a reason to kick Walter out. So, I got the box and hid it within my laundry bin. I felt really rattled, and the sight of my roommate disgusted me. However, in an hour, he came back. I just told him to stay on his side and not to talk to me. After that, no words were spoken. I tried to stay awake out of fear that he might try to find the box, but after a long day, I fell asleep around 2 a.m. When I woke up, I saw Walter was gone, and it felt good seeing him out of the room for once. But then I remembered the box. I went to my laundry bin, and it was gone. I panicked, and not long after, my RA was knocking on the door. I let him in and told him the story. While he did believe me, he said he couldn't do anything without that box, otherwise, he'd just be going off my word alone. Which wasn't much. I felt like I was losing my mind. The RA left, and about 5 hours later, Walter came back. I asked him what he did with the box. He played dumb and said, "What box? I don't know what you're talking about." I pressured him to stop playing dumb, but Walter kept denying it. I couldn't stand to look at him or be in the same room with him anymore. It's now the second semester, and yes, I'm still dorming with Walter, unfortunately. He did let me know that he will never do it again, and that if he does, he'll let me know and we'll move out immediately. I took his word, and we're still dorming as of today. However, I stay out of the room as much as I can. He still creeps me out. The worst part is that I can't sleep sometimes nor focus during the day as I keep thinking of what was in the box. Why did he steal my photo? Why did he steal my socks? What were the glasses for? The part that leaves me scared each time is what those eyelashes were doing there, and perhaps weirdest of all, was that he labeled the box with my name. It was my first year of university. I had just finished unpacking all of my stuff into my room, and my family had just left. Later on that same day, my roommate finally arrived, and right from the get-go, I knew this kid was the most socially inept person I'd ever met. I introduced myself as Curtis, sticking out my arm for a handshake. He paused, looked down at my arm as if he didn't understand it at first, then laughed and went, "Oh," and gave me an almost dead fish handshake. I had to ask him for his name since he didn't even tell me when we shook hands. He was Riley. I tried to make small talk, but he just answered my questions with yes or no's, occasionally awkwardly laughing or smiling. Within minutes, we were both just sitting on our beds on our laptops, not talking to each other. I was upset and planned on requesting to be placed with a different roommate. Anyone would be better than Riley, I thought. Riley was just a really awkward kid, but I soon learned he was much more than just that. I met some of the other kids on my floor, and they seemed cool, so that was good. I came back to my dorm after looking around campus the first night to find Riley still in the same position he was in when I left. I said, "What's up, Riley?" and he didn't answer, not to my surprise. It was 9:30. I didn't have anything to do, so I turned out the lamp on my side of the room and went to bed. I didn't actually fall asleep anytime soon, though. Riley was on his laptop until 3 in the morning. When he finally closed his laptop, I fell asleep pretty quickly but woke up within the hour. The blinds to our room had been opened, and the moonlight now creeping into the room made everything visible, including Riley sitting on the side of his bed, looking at me. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and said, "Riley, what the hell are you doing?" He whispered back, "Sorry," and laid down. The next morning, I woke up to find Riley had already gotten up. I felt like it was the first time he'd left the room. It was a Saturday. The first Saturday of the year, meaning orientation and all the campus festivities. During the orientation, as my group was walking by the school gardens, I heard a couple of students ahead of me saying, "What is that kid doing in there?" I saw who they were talking about. It was Riley, literally sitting in the dirt behind a patch of bushes, rubbing the bark of a tree with his hand. The orientation leader didn't notice, otherwise, I'm sure she would have said something. I just walked by, not saying anything, eventually telling the two kids I overheard that he was my roommate as a way to start a conversation and maybe make some friends. They apologized for me. None of us really knew if it was appropriate to laugh or not, but we did. I made friends with those two kids, and we made plans to get together that night. I also learned when I got back to my dorm that the school found another roommate for me. Things seemed to be turning around quickly for the better. I left the room that night to go meet up with the two kids I met. And when I got back, Riley was sitting on the desk chair facing the door. I said, "Oh hey, what's up?" He said, "Nothing," very matter-of-factly. I sat down on my bed and opened my laptop and realized I forgot to lock it. I also realized that all of my emails had been opened, emails I was pretty sure I didn't even read, and a bunch of folders of mine had been opened. They all must have snooped through my laptop when I was out. When I asked him if he did, he responded, "No," very loudly, half a second after I even finished my question. I could read him like a book. This creepy kid was literally going through my computer when I was out. I knew he did it, but I didn't pursue it. I was ready to go to bed, so as I went into my bed to look for my pajamas, I felt like my clothing had all been moved around as well. I knew I'd be out of there forever by tomorrow, so I didn't say anything. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of a zipper. I sat up and saw Riley on the ground going through my bag. I turned the lamp on this time, confronting him about it. He played dumb, saying, "I think you have my toothbrush by mistake." It was the closest thing to wits that he'd shown up until that point. Still, I knew he was lying and I knew something was wrong with him. I couldn't get physical with him. The next day, I met my new roommate in the same building and everything went well. Sunday night, after having a decent conversation with my roommate, who was no social butterfly but was miles better than Riley, we both turned off our lights and went to bed. For the third night in a row, I woke up at some odd hour of the night to a strange noise. It was a weird clicking noise. It wasn't consistent, but I'd hear it at least twice every 30 seconds. I got up, hoping to find something innocent like a heavy bag putting pressure on a weak floorboard or even a mouse. But as I scoped out the room, I realized the sound was actually coming from the other side of the door. The night light in the common area was always on. So when I looked through the peephole, I was able to see the scalp of the person standing on the other side of our door. They were looking down, so I couldn't see their face, but now that I was paying attention, I realized the tiny clicking noises were actually coming from the doorknob. I was sure the person was trying to unlock the door. I dialed the number for the campus police department, and they showed up in under 5 minutes to the common room. Only then did I feel it was safe to open the door. I found the officers to have Riley in cuffs. I had a feeling it was him. I told them everything, that he was my former roommate who was going through my stuff, so I switched dorms, only to find him trying to break into my new dorm. They took him away. I don't know what happened to him after that, but I never saw him again. He either got suspended for the semester or expelled. I got through the rest of my years at university like anybody else. However, the nightmarish experience I had with Riley still pops up in my head every now and then. I had a single dorm my first semester of sophomore year. It was in the corner of the floor, kind of secluded from the rest of the dorm rooms since it was in its own little section. You had to turn a corner to even see the door. It was nice because I'd be able to still talk with friends on my floor, invite people over to my room, and still have privacy when it was time to do homework or go to sleep. A few weeks into the semester, while studying for a bio exam, the silence was interrupted by a noise. It took me a bit to realize it was a light tapping on the door. It was so light that I almost didn't even hear it. I yelled, "Come in," but the door didn't open, so I got up to open it. Nobody was there. I walked around the corner to look down the hall. Nobody. Somebody was obviously messing with me. I went back to my bed and continued studying, this time leaving the door open. Nobody came back. The next night, a few minutes after shutting the lamp in my bedroom to go to bed, the tapping on the door returned. Only this time it was much louder, more of a knocking sound. I called out, "Who is it?" and again the knocking stopped, and nobody answered. I got out of my bed quickly and opened the door to see my small private corridor was void of any people. Again, I ran the 10 feet from my door to the corner to look down the main hallway of the floor. Nobody. The next morning, I asked some of the other kids in the dorm if they had been messing with me. Everyone said no. The next night, I woke up after having been asleep for 3 hours. Someone was knocking on my door again, this time louder than ever. I had trouble deciding whether to open the door or not. With a bout of courage, I hopped up and opened the door. Nobody was there, as I was expecting. But this time, I full-on sprinted down the tiny corridor isolating my room, and when I turned the corner, I saw the back of somebody disappearing behind the far corner on the opposite side of the hallway. I ran as fast as I could down the hallway, and as I turned to the next hallway where I saw the person a few seconds earlier, I saw a door at the end of the hallway shutting. It wasn't a dorm room, it was a bathroom. I felt like I was ready to confront whoever this joker was, so I pushed open the bathroom door with force. The light was off. I turned it on, expecting to see somebody hiding in there, but I didn't see anyone. My first instinct was to check the 2 bathroom stalls, which were both shut. I got on my hands and knees and looked under the 2 stalls. 2 heavy black boots could be seen from underneath one of the stall doors. I took a deep breath and pushed the stall open. I was confused. There were the boots sitting on the floor, but no person to wear them. And then I heard a creepy giggling noise. Thank you, not a feminine or a childlike one. It was a kind of laughing that I could only imagine to be that of a really old, crazy man. For some reason, my confidence was gone, and I was scared shitless. Therefore, I ran back to my room and shut the door. I hopped back in my bed and started texting every friend I had. Of course, everybody was asleep, though. The knocking happened one more time that night. I ignored it. It went on for about 30 seconds before whoever that person was finally gave up. I spoke to everybody on my floor the next day. Nobody else heard any knocking, and everybody swore they weren't pranking me. Everybody seemed sincere. I don't know why this person chose to harass me or who this person was. Judging by the boots and the laughing I heard, this was an older man, though, and that disturbs me. In the fall of 2012, I decided to go back to college. I was a single mom of 3 boys, but they were all in school now, and me going back was finally possible. The school I went to is a regional campus of a very large university and located in a neighborhood that is known for crime, meth, heroin, and prostitution. But it was only a 20-minute drive from my home, and I didn't really feel unsafe going there. The first day in first class was intimidating. I didn't know anyone, and I was a lot older than most of the students. I was 28 at the time. I sat down in the back of the room at a table, and a few minutes later, a lady who was around my age sat next to me. She was very skinny and smelled like cigarettes, and even had greasy hair and sunken eyes, but she started to talk to me, and she seemed normal enough. She started off the conversation telling me that she chose to sit next to me because I was wearing the prettiest blouse in the room. Kind of strange, but as an awkward person myself, I leave a lot of leeway for people to say or do awkward things before I think too deeply into it. She didn't have a backpack, any books, a pen, or a notebook, nothing. She said her financial aid hadn't come through yet, but she didn't want to fall behind in classes and asked if she could share my book. I agreed, and I even gave her a pen and paper. After the first class, she asked if I would mind going to the library with her so she could scan some of the pages to take home. I agreed, and we started to head to the library. But on the way there, she stopped and looked at her phone and said her son just texted her that she needs to come home to do something. She asked if I'd come with her, but I told her I have another class shortly and can't go. I asked her if she still wanted to go to the library first, and she said no, that she had to go to her son now, but she couldn't go alone. I kept telling her that I couldn't go with her, and then she started crying. At this point, we were in a common area outside. I was heading toward the library while I assumed she was walking to the parking lot. I told her I needed to go to the library, and she's welcome to come talk or whatever she needs, but I have to go. I didn't like being outside away from people with this woman anymore. I was trying to get back to a busier area. She gets really upset and starts screaming, basically says "you" to me. I can't remember how the interaction went exactly because I was frozen in confusion by how quickly she transitioned from friendly, then to crying and scared, and now to screaming in my face a slew of hateful, angry things. I turned around to start walking to the library, and I called my friend so that I would have someone aware if this lady tried anything more than just screaming. I get to the library and I start to watch her through the glass doors. She's standing in the middle of a parking lot, and a car pulls up with a man in it. He was very obviously upset with the woman. They looked like they were arguing, but I couldn't hear them from the inside. Eventually, she gets in the car and leaves with him. The next day, I was dreading class because I didn't know what this woman's attitude would be that day, but she wasn't there. In the end, she never came back. I didn't know her name or, at the time, how to look at a class roster, but looking back, I'm fairly certain she was not enrolled at the school at all and, for whatever reason, was trying to get me to leave with her. I wish I knew her intentions, but at the same time, I'm glad I never had to find out. My name is Linda. My late husband Edric was the best thing that ever happened to me. Long story short, he passed away in a motorcycle accident exactly 8 years ago as I'm writing this on April 29, 2016. What I'm about to tell you is something I've blocked out of my mind since it happened, but I think I'm finally ready to open up about it. Edric and I both grew up in Italy. English is actually my second language. He always dreamed of traveling to Greece, but we kept postponing the trip. One of my biggest regrets was not taking time off work one summer to go with him. In late spring of 2018, I decided to bite the bullet and take the trip he had always talked about. Being only 36 years old with no children, I didn't much like the prospect of traveling alone, so I decided to book a cruise, thinking it would be more relaxing. I was actually in luck. Celebrity Cruise Line had a Best of Greece cruise that covered 6 cities: Athens, Santorini, Ephesus, Mykonos, Volos, Thessaloniki, and back to Athens. I tried my best to be excited about the cruise, knowing it was what he would have wanted, but I couldn't help but find the whole thing somewhat melancholy. It just felt wrong to be there without him. Admittedly, I may have gotten a little too wine drunk the first night after leaving Athens, but I felt I was entitled to behave less prudently. After exiting the boat and enjoying the city's offerings, I found myself drinking endless martinis at some nameless bar. That's when I noticed him. Across the bar, there was some 40-year-old looking man with long straight brown hair and an unkempt beard. He wasn't bad looking, actually, but his stare was unsettling. At first, I brushed it off as the wandering gaze of some lonely guy. Maybe he found me attractive. I wasn't going to get offended if he wanted to look at me. After catching his eye a few more times, though, I started feeling unease begin to set in. The way he was glaring at me was just so perturbing. It wasn't seductive or charming like he was trying to flirt or anything like that. It was literally as if he was trying to sear a hole in my face with his eyes. I finished what must have been my 8th drink, paid my tab, and quickly made my way back to the dock. By that night, my memory of that man had completely dissipated. The next city on the docket was Ephesus. My time there was essentially spent the same way, consuming far more alcohol than was acceptable for a woman my age. Other than some fleeting guilt, everything went well in Ephesus. Mykonos was next. I'm sure it won't come as a surprise to any of you at this point, but near the end of the day, I unavoidably found myself sitting alone at an outdoor bar. That's when I noticed him. There was a man standing against a light fixture with his arms crossed. I strained my eyes, thinking my mind must have been playing a trick on me. It was unmistakable, though. It was the guy from Santorini. He was too far away for me to tell whether he was looking at me, but his head was tilted in my direction. Oddly, he was wearing the same exact outfit he had worn in Santorini. A wave of discomfort washed over me. Was I being stalked? My palms began feeling clammy, so I nervously rubbed them on my dress as I lowered my head, trying to avoid looking in his direction. I could feel his aura radiating, though, even from that far away. I couldn't help myself. I glanced back up, but he was gone. You might expect my body to have flushed with relief, but I was actually even more anxious. I frantically began looking around, trying to see if he had gotten closer. I didn't feel comfortable walking back to the boat alone, so I ran into a couple that was leaving and made some small talk, then walked back with them. That night, instead of retiring to my stateroom, I decided to explore the boat in hopes of running into that strange man. After scouring the boat in its entirety, I gave up around midnight. The next morning, I got off the boat in Volos, determined to solve this mystery. Instead of venturing into the city, I opted to wait at the gangway. I watched painfully for an inordinate amount of time as person after person made their way off the ship. I didn't miss a single one, but he wasn't one of them. Frustrated, I returned to the ship and spent the rest of the day by the pool. Thessaloniki was the last city. As much as I dreaded it, I had to reconcile the fact that I'd be wasting my vacation if I stayed on the boat. So reluctantly, I got off the ship and tried to enjoy the city. Feeling superstitious, I thought it might be best to avoid bars and alcohol this time around, which I did. Instead, I wandered the streets aimlessly, admiring the architecture and enjoying the weather. And then, as if on cue, there he was again. He was a few streets down in the middle of the road with his arms at his sides. Instead of being afraid, I felt a huge rush of adrenaline-induced confidence start to pour in. I yelled out to him and began walking in his direction. Instead of acknowledging me, he actually turned and ran. It was bizarre. He turned a corner, and I chased after him. I made it to the corner and barely saw him run down another street, and I sprinted to follow him. I turned the same corner, and he had disappeared, nowhere to be seen, like he had evaporated out of existence. I couldn't sleep that night. I was relieved when the ship pulled into Athens, but once I made it back home, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling of that man that was weighing on my mind. I whipped out my laptop and started doing research. I wasn't quite sure what to even look for, but I thought recent police reports were a decent place to start. After having no luck, I stumbled upon some missing persons advertisements. I scrolled through page after page, and then I found something. There, in the middle of the page, was a missing person ad for a guy who looked almost identical to the guy who had been following me. I stared, frozen in shock. What was even more disturbing, though, was his name. He had the same first name as my Edric, which was a cruel coincidence. The very first thing I did was call the police and report my sightings. The operator thanked me for my assistance and put me on hold. A few minutes later, she asked me if I was 100% confident in what I had seen. I told her yes. After an uncomfortable pause, she went on to say that they had actually closed that man's case just over a month ago. Apparently, he had been found dead in a boating accident off the coast of Parga, Greece. What's more sinister, though, is that the date of his confirmed death was the exact month and day of my husband's passing, just 2 years later. I hung up the phone, literally shivering. I don't think I've ever been more terrified than I was at that moment. I began feeling dizzy, questioning if maybe I was going crazy, like had I imagined everything. Suddenly, another wave of realization slapped me in the face. The only city I hadn't seen him in, Ephesus, was actually a city in Turkey, not Greece. I'm not a believer in the paranormal, but I've spent hours trying to rationalize my sightings, and no conclusion I reach makes sense. My niece Kaylee had her wedding in Athens last summer, though, so I had no choice. And like clockwork, there he was again. I only saw him for a split second this time, standing in that same outfit by the bar, head pointed in my direction. To be completely honest with you, there were so many drunk people there that I might have imagined it. Either way, I vowed to never step foot in Greece again. In 2018, my family decided that we were going to take a vacation on a cruise ship. None of us had ever been on one, and we thought this would be a great first-time experience with the family. We docked from Miami, Florida, for a 7-day trip that would take us to the Bahamas. As an 18-year-old girl at the time, I was super excited to finally see why so many people love to go on cruises. Honestly, as the week went by, it wasn't that all exciting. You're pretty much on a floating hotel with a bunch of strangers. The only actual fun time that I had was when we docked in the Bahamas and we could walk around and check out the area. But as we were heading back to Miami on the 7th day, I decided that I wanted to walk around the bow of the ship by myself. It was late, and the rest of my family was in the dining hall drinking and celebrating our last night on the cruise. I was leaning on the rail of the bow, just staring out into the black ocean. If I'm being honest, it was actually terrifying looking out. I remember thinking, what if someone fell overboard? You wouldn't be able to see them. As I continued to stare out into the black ocean, I remember the moon reflecting on the necklace that I was wearing. It was my grandmother's. She had given it to me as a gift just before she passed away a few years back. As I was reminiscing about my grandmother and the terrifying dark ocean before me, a man approached me. At this moment in the story, I was a little tipsy. The man seemed to be pretty cute, and my guard wasn't all the way up. He said hello and asked for my name. We started to chat a bit when I suddenly realized how alone we were. It was just us two by the bow of the ship talking. I didn't see another person at all. This fact alone started to sober me up. Even though he was cute, I started to get this uncomfortable feeling. I nervously told him I needed to get back to the dining hall. I was walking away when he grabbed my arm hard. I told him to let go. He looked at my chest and said, "That's a lovely necklace." I tried to yank my arm away from his grasp, but he was too strong. He tore the necklace clean off my neck. I started to scream at him to give it back. This is where it becomes nightmarish. He slapped me hard across my cheek and started to bear hug me. He was trying to lift me up and throw me off the bow of the ship. I screamed at the top of my lungs. I screamed so loudly that I thought my throat was going to tear. I fought for my life as he aggressively tried to lift me up over the railing and throw me over. By the grace of God, 2 crew members heard my screams and sprinted over. One of them grabbed hold of the man while the other grabbed me and pulled me back down from the railing. At this point, I was bawling my eyes out. The crew members radioed for backup, and in 2 minutes, there were about 10 security members at the scene. They detained the man and threw him in the brig. I remember wondering what the brig was when one of the crew members said that it was the jail cell that they have on the ship. That is exactly how I found out that cruise ships have jails. My family eventually came to me, and I was returned my grandmother's necklace. In the end, the cruise liner offered us a full refund and a 5-year pass in their first-class suites. As for the guy who attacked me, when we docked in Miami, he was arrested for assault. I don't know what his sentence was. I hope you enjoyed my fun fact. What do you think causes people to snap? Is it stress, jealousy, rage, maybe cabin fever? I don't really have an answer, but you need to listen to this. A few years ago, my boyfriend at the time bought us 2 tickets for a getaway cruise vacation. He had just been promoted in his job, and he decided to splurge and get us first class. It was honestly one of the most luxurious experiences that I've ever had. It sounds corny, but I felt like Rose on the Titanic the way the staff treated us. We were having a great time. We'd see live performances during the day and go dancing in one of the private clubs they had for their exclusive members during the nights. One night, I believe it was the night before the ship was to head back to port in New York, my boyfriend and I decided to go to bed early. We were in our cabin suite. My boyfriend was brushing his teeth in the bathroom, and I was lying on the bed scrolling through Instagram when there was a loud knock on our door. I called out to my boyfriend and asked if he ordered room service. He yelled back that he didn't, and I got up from the bed and went to the door. I was about to open it but decided to look through the peephole instead. I believe this small action was what saved our lives. As I looked through the peephole, I saw a disheveled-looking man standing in front of our door. He was breathing heavily, his eyes were wide, and there were red stains smeared all over him. I didn't quite know what to think as I stared at him. 20 seconds must have passed when he started banging on our door again, but this time much harder. The door handle started to jiggle as he tried to get in, and I yelled for my boyfriend to get over here now. The man was now screaming that he needed to come in and show us something. My boyfriend pushed past me and looked through the peephole. He yelled to get away from our door right now. The man did not listen. He continued to bang on our door, screaming to let him in. He was banging so hard that the edges of the door started to splinter. Terrified that he was going to break in and do God knows what to us, my boyfriend called for security from the cabin phone. We stayed pressed up against the door to prevent him from getting in. When we finally heard other voices outside, we heard security yelling at him to stop what he was doing. I thought there was going to be some big fight and the man would retaliate, but it sounded like he just listened to the security. We could hear him being detained, and we figured it was now safe to open our door. After about half an hour of explaining to security what happened, we soon found out the grisly details of what this man was doing. Only 2 cabin doors down from us was where that man and his wife were staying. They were going to ask her some questions about her husband, but found out she had been stabbed over 40 times in the chest and neck. The man had used an ice pick that was in their cabin freezer. After he mutilated his wife, for some reason, he wandered over to our cabin and was asking to come in. He had the ice pick in his hand when he was knocking, and I'm positive he would have killed me and my boyfriend if I had not looked through the peephole first. The weird thing about this whole story is I remember seeing that man in the breakfast lounge with his wife. They seemed like a normal, happy couple enjoying a cruise vacation. My boyfriend later explained to me that he probably caught cabin fever and just snapped. This experience actually left such a traumatic imprint on me that I was unable to continue my relationship with my boyfriend. Sad, I know, but that's how badly it messed me up. I've since gotten better, but believe me when I say I will never step foot on a cruise ship again. I'm an only child, and my parents are older, so they don't like active vacations, but more sightseeing in museums kind of stuff. Of course, I'm a kid who likes to play and wants more fun stuff. The compromise my parents came up with was a Disney cruise. We would depart from our home in New York City for a cruise along the east coast to the maritime provinces of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, Canada. We would make ports of call at Bar Harbor, Maine, St. John's, New Brunswick, and Halifax, Nova Scotia, in Canada. They would visit all the museums and art galleries in each port, and I could join the kids' club for swimming, volleyball, rock climbing, and dance parties. On the first day of the cruise, I quickly changed into my swimsuit in our cabin and went to the kids' club to meet the other kids. The director met me at the door, welcomed me, and said if I needed instruction in anything, she was there to help. Otherwise, I could make friends. She had a plan for various activities, and she said I'd be tired and happy at the end of the evening, so welcome. It was around 9 o'clock when we finished the day, and because the ship was 80% old people, the restaurants and corridors were virtually empty. That included my parents, who were, I'm sure, already in their PJs watching a movie from bed in the room. Our stateroom was on one of the lower levels without a balcony, and the ship was as big as the city, so I had a long way from the pool deck, where the kids' club was, to the stateroom. It was a challenge, as all the corridors on each of the 15 decks looked identical. After waiting for like 15 minutes for one of the 4 elevators, I got impatient and ran for the stairwell. As I ran down the steps, I heard a man's voice, kind of laughing, saying, "Are you trying to run away from me?" I turned around, and a man who looked around 20 or 25, dressed in workman's clothes, beamed a big smile at me. I was surprised and unsure how to act, so I just gave him a smile back and turned to continue down the stairs. But he was so quick and moved past me, then blocked my descent, his arms on each of the stairwell railings. He looked up at me, still in my swimsuit, and hit me with a barrage of questions. "What's your name? How old are you? Where are you from? Who are you traveling with? What deck are you on?" He just kept asking, but not giving me a chance to reply, and I wouldn't have even if he waited for an answer. I was frightened. When he said, "Why are you so uncomfortable with me?" I lied and said, "My dad was waiting for me. He expects to meet me as I come down. He took the elevator, and I'm racing him, so please let me pass." Before he could move, I dashed under his arm and ran down the steps. The second night after Kids Club, I went to take the elevator, and there was the same man in the corridor. He grinned again when he spotted me and very purposefully blocked my way. He began again with his questions, but they seemed even more personal this time, and he was saying things like, "You have a beautiful smile," and "I love your outfit, it is so cute." My alarm bells rang loudly in my head as he said, "I'll walk you to your room." "What floor are you on?" I knew I had to get out of there fast. At that moment, a couple walked up to the elevator that wasn't too far from where he was trapping me, and I yelled out, "Hold that elevator for me, please," and I pushed right past him and joined the couple, talking and laughing together. I think they were on a honeymoon. They didn't even notice me. When the elevator came, I got in with the honeymooners. The scary man was nowhere to be seen. When I got to the room, I told my mom what had happened, and from that time on, my dad walked me to and from kids club. My mom was determined to discover who this creep was, and we went to the photo studio that took the obligatory passenger photos. We looked at all the passenger photos, and he wasn't among them. For the remainder of the trip, I never saw him again. It was as if he wasn't on the ship. What could have happened to me if I hadn't run away and dodged him with the couple in the elevator? I sometimes wondered if he was ever on the ship or if it was just my imagination, since no one else ever saw him other than me. I'm a senior at Rowan University in South Jersey. My friends and the sorority call me Lucinda. Last summer, I took a Bahamas cruise with some of my girlfriends to let off some steam. We had all just turned 21, so our goals for this vacation were to drink more, and have fun. We all felt like we deserved this vacation after such an exhausting semester spent dealing with Greek life drama and schoolwork. Anyway, I'll keep things short. I was with my friends, Ratty, Nomi, and Tegan. Ratty and I didn't always see eye to eye. There was some petty drama between the two of us. I always assumed she was jealous of me because she never spent any time in the gym and spent a lot of time eating. I think you can see what I'm getting at. Anyway, I was really close with Tegan and Nomi, so I figured things would be peachy. The cruise line we had booked was Carnival, and it would be going to a couple of Bahamas islands before returning to New York City. The boat pulled into the first destination, called Paradise Island. Long story short, all four of us were really wasted at the bar, laughing and flirting with guys so they'd buy us drinks. It was actually really fun. At one point, Nomi asked me if I would grab her a drink, so I did. I went up to the bar, ordered the drinks, and waited. Nomi followed me to grab hers. The drinks came out, but I really wanted to take a selfie with her before we went back to our table. I pulled out my phone and took a couple of selfies with the drinks. Just then, Taylor called Nomi over and, being as drunk as she was, she went bounding off without me, leaving her drink behind. I didn't want someone to steal her drink, so I put my phone on the bar and grabbed her drink with my other hand. With both drinks, I made my way to where they were sitting and made fun of Nomi for being so forgetful. Pretty soon after that, we had to start making our way back towards the boat. The second the boat pulled away, I started frantically searching for my phone. I felt like such an idiot. I had left it at the bar. I started crying, knowing this would ruin our trip. I wanted to jump overboard for losing my phone on the first day of the cruise. I pulled out my laptop to try and locate my phone's location. To my surprise, it wasn't on the island, but was actually showing up as somewhere on the boat. It was hard to pinpoint exactly where its location was, but I was relieved to think that someone must have found it and returned it to the Lost and Found or something. I went up to Lost and Found, but they said no one had turned a phone in. Any relief I had was completely gone now. Why would someone take my phone if they weren't planning on returning it? I went back to my friends and cried about it again. Radit told me not to worry about it and that I should just try enjoying the trip as best I could. So that's what I did. I didn't think about it for a whole day, which I was really proud of. You never realize how much time you actually spend on your phone. I kept going to take selfies or check social media, only to realize I had no way of doing so. The next day, though, while I was in the very front of the boat, I pulled my laptop out of my bag to check my phone's location just out of curiosity. To my surprise, it was almost right on top of me. I started looking around, but there were so many people, any one of them could have had my phone. I told my friends this, and they seemed as shocked as I was. All except Ratty. It looked like she was trying to hold back laughter. I started getting really annoyed when I noticed she found my situation funny. A few hours later, we found ourselves in the arcade at the back of the boat, messing around with the childish games and whatnot. Again, I pulled out my laptop and once more, my phone's location was basically on top of me. Now I was furious. Whoever had my phone was following me around the boat. It had to be Ratty. That fatty thought this whole thing was a big joke. I confronted her, showing her proof on my laptop. She insisted that she had no idea what happened to my phone and it wasn't her fault that I was so stupid that I couldn't keep track of it. We started yelling at each other, and I said some pretty mean things. I made her empty her pockets and her purse, which she reluctantly did. My phone wasn't anywhere in sight, though. She called me an idiot again, smirking to herself. I stormed off by myself, tears streaming down my face. I spent the rest of my day in my room and refused to do anything with Ratty for the rest of the night. The next 2 days went by really fast. I refused to hang out with Ratty the whole time and instead spent both days by myself, randomly checking my phone's location out of desperation. When I got back to my room that night, I noticed something weird. There was an envelope lying on the ground, like someone had slipped it under the door. It was a handwritten letter. I started reading and felt disgusted. Some random guy named Edward had supposedly found my phone unlocked, went through it, realized how attractive I was, and wanted to confess his love for me. The letter was really short, but I felt utterly grossed out. Some creep had full access to my phone and knew what room I was staying in. I wanted to cry. I reported this to the crew security team, hoping they'd be able to do something about it. Unfortunately, they were useless. The good news was that loser Edward didn't try to contact me again, and the cruise ended. Ratty and I made up, and the 4 of us parted ways. I wish I could tell you the story ended there, though. That same night, after my dad drove me home, I was up late watching reality TV on my laptop. That's when it hit me. Why not check my phone's location now? I was kicking myself for not having thought about that sooner. I pulled it up and waited for it to load. I stared in shock as I realized the little blue dot was showing up right on top of my house. My blood ran cold. I screamed, waking my family up. My dad burst into my room, realized what was going on and sprinted outside in his bare feet, brandishing his hunting rifle. I followed close behind. My dad fired a shot into the air and screamed at the top of his lungs. Just then, some guy jumped our side gate and sprinted down the street. My dad hesitated before deciding not to follow him. I was mortified. My dad and I made our way around back, and the scene was horrific. One of my dad's backyard ladders was leaned up against the side of the house, directly underneath my bedroom window. Even more horrifying, though, was that the little wooden latch above the window was almost completely cut through. Maybe a few more minutes and he would have been able to open the window. I might not have been alive to tell the story if I had gone to sleep instead of checking my location. We filed the police report, and it's been almost 2 weeks without an incident. I still have trouble sleeping at night, knowing that some creep has access to all of my information, all my pictures, my name, contacts, and address. My phone has been deactivated, but I can only imagine what kind of data he was able to keep. I'll update if something else happens. This might sound odd to some of you, but I've always dreamed of being a bartender on a cruise ship. I don't know why, but life at sea just sounds so peaceful to me. Plus, I'm what you'd call a social butterfly, and the people you meet on cruise ships always have the most fascinating stories. A few years ago, I made that dream a reality. As a cheerful woman in my mid-20s with a couple of years of bartending experience tucked under my belt, I breezed through the interview process. Royal Caribbean welcomed me as a bartender, and things were off to a great start. I won't bore you with the irrelevant details about my tenure, but you should know that this position came with lots of travel, sometimes too much. After just 2 tours, I interacted with 3 times the number of people that I had while working at my local bar for 2 months. The influx of people was overwhelming, but that's one of the reasons I vied so adamantly for this job. This story takes place during my 3rd tour, a 12-day transatlantic cruise from Miami to Portugal and Spain. It was a long one. We'd be at sea for 5 days straight. There was a silver lining, though. I'd finally be back in Europe, and Royal Caribbean might let me take a week or 2 to return home to Lyon. To preface, I know how to hold my own against drunk, overly flirtatious men buying drinks from me. Handsome or ugly, old or young, I always work nights, so that's just part of the trade. During this particular cruise, one customer stood out from the rest, though. This tall, attractive 30-something-year-old kept catching my eye night after night. He'd find a seat at my bar, nursing his drink slowly. Eventually, we struck up a conversation about each other's lives, and he was always the last customer to leave the bar at the end of the night. For the first time in a while, I started looking forward to those late nights when Anatole would hang around my bar. I could tell there was some depth behind those light green eyes. A sorrowful look seemed etched into his features. On the 3rd night, I got him to open up about it, and the story was downright depressing. He reluctantly told me about his troubled marriage, pausing often as if weighing each word. His wife Rosalind had been having an affair with his best friend from college, Douglas. I won't get into the specifics, but it sounded brutal. There were a lot of specifics. He literally told me their full names, as if he had been waiting to vent to someone about this for years. He went on to tell me that he had boarded the cruise alone, hoping the vastness of the sea would help him forget his pain. I honestly didn't know how to react other than continuing to fill his glass. The night before we were scheduled to dock in Ponta Delgada, he expressed his gratitude for my company and listening ear. "You've made this trip bearable," he admitted. "Let me buy you a drink to show my thanks." This wasn't the first time I'd been offered a drink, but this time was different. I felt a genuine connection with this man, and it seemed unfair what he had gone through. I obliged, telling him I was happy to have helped him through such a difficult time. Normally, I'd pour my own drink, but he insisted on doing it himself, saying it was the polite and fair thing to do. I should have maintained professional boundaries, but his insistence, combined with his apparent vulnerability, persuaded me otherwise. Reluctantly, I agreed and invited him behind the bar, a decision that might have changed my life. He mixed the drink, his hand steady, and handed it to me with a small, sad smile. The drink tasted fine, but within minutes, a heavy drowsiness clouded my senses. I tried to grasp the edge of the bar for support, but everything went black as I succumbed to the unexpected wooziness. I didn't even have time to scream. When I awoke, the sight before me was terrifying. I was in my own room, but the place was in disarray. It looked like a tornado had ripped through it. Panic surged through me as I realized I was tied to my own bed with a towel shoved down my throat. A wave of relief washed over me as I concluded that my clothes were all still intact, untouched. An hour later, room service found me and freed me. It had been a full day. We were already pulling out of Jamaica. I was more angry than anything else. How could I have been so stupid? I had fallen for Anatole's charming ploy, and he had taken advantage of my sympathetic nature. I doubted Anatole was even his real name. My suite, as I already said, was utterly trashed. My jewelry, phone, and personal belongings were all gone. The safe was wide open, its contents vanished. My suitcase had also disappeared. The cruise ship security team made a massive deal over this, not to the passengers, obviously, but amongst themselves. They reviewed the footage only to discover that the guy had disembarked early in Ponta Delgada, not returning to the ship. The crew had no choice but to leave him behind when he didn't show up at the gangway at departure time. They urged me to keep my mouth shut about all this, telling me not to go to the public. They offered me substantial compensation and promised me they'd find him eventually. After all, he must have used a passport to book the cruise. In the weeks after the cruise, they contacted me and filled me in on what their search turned up. Because the cruise hadn't actually returned to the States, it was a nightmare trying to contact American police and give them details on the crime and the perpetrator. Portugal was a little more compliant, conducting at least a semblance of a search, but even I knew there was no way Anatole was still in Portugal. The United States eventually did get involved, launching a full-scale investigation. The identities that man had used were all real passport, real name, real address, real everything. They went to his supposed place of residence first. The landlord told them that Anatole had moved just over a month ago, leaving nothing behind. The landlord did have a personal phone number of his, but that was of course disconnected. The police looked for any property in his name, but there was nothing. His criminal history was also suspiciously clean. The guy had never even gotten a parking ticket. The police went to his previous jobs, all of which gave the same story. The only address they had was the one he left, and the only phone number they had was the one he had disconnected. I was furious. They literally had his full identity. There must have been something more they could have done. I couldn't help but blame myself for this whole ordeal. You might think things ended there, you'd be very wrong. I took an extended leave from Royal Caribbean, hoping to distance myself from the whole thing. Unfortunately, the situation only escalated. About a month later, I received the first one. A blank envelope was left at my apartment with a single photograph inside. It was me walking to my car after doing some grocery shopping. I wanted to scream. A week later, I got the second one, a candid shot of me shopping at the mall. At first, I tried ignoring the pictures, but they just kept coming. The envelopes came one after another, each one a picture of me unaware of the camera. Each picture felt like a taunt, a reminder that he was still out there, watching me. I can't describe the terror I lived with during these weeks. I was afraid to leave my house. I couldn't go to work, hang out with friends, or shop without constantly looking over my shoulder. After the sixth envelope, I went to the police. I know you're probably wondering why I didn't go after the first envelope. Honestly, I can't even answer that question. The police were not very helpful. I don't think they even knew what to do, but I wanted them to have a record of my case in the event that something more serious came of it. And that's exactly what happened. One night, knocks echoed against my bedroom window. I knew it was him. The police investigated, found nothing, and left me more scared than I had been before they arrived. I had had enough. I moved apartments immediately after that, leaving no forwarding address, changing all my contact details, and increasing my security measures as best I could. Thankfully, I never heard from that man again. It's only been about 3 months, though, so hopefully, I don't jinx myself by putting this into words. My best guess is that he was able to unlock my phone while I was passed out, and that's how he was able to steal all my information. The worst thing about all of this isn't everything that was stolen or even the fact that my whole life was uprooted when I changed apartments. The worst thing about this situation is that I'll never aspire to work on a cruise ship again. I don't even know if I want to keep working as a bartender. It's crazy how quickly a lifelong dream can turn into a nightmare. How would you define evil? Is it a human murdering another human? Is it doing harm to the innocent? Whatever evil is to you, this story is exactly that. Listen to this. Back in 2018, my family and I went on a cruise vacation for 5 days. It was Christmas time, and this was our usual family tradition. We would take a cruise to the Caribbean islands and then be back by Christmas Eve. It was actually a great holiday vacation. Anyway, I believe it was our last night on the ship. We were heading back to our port in Fort Lauderdale. My sister and I were walking around the ship pretty late. By the way, I was 21 at the time of the story. We were walking around close to the bow of the ship when we both suddenly heard these horrific screams. My sister is a nurse, so we both immediately ran over to where we heard the screams. We got to the very back of the ship and saw this woman standing by the rails, laughing hysterically. A little confused, we both approached her cautiously, asking her if everything was okay because we heard screaming. The woman, who had to be in her mid-30s, started to laugh even harder. Now my sister and I were about to leave this weird woman alone when she started to point her finger over the railing like she wanted to show us something. My sister and I stepped up to the railing and looked down. Down in the black ocean below, barely visible, were 2 young children thrashing in the water, trying to stay afloat. When I tell you my heart sank into my stomach, I am not exaggerating. My sister immediately ran off, screaming for help. I stayed with the woman who was still laughing hysterically. I remember she even bent over the railing and started waving at the children as if they were going off to school. She called out saying, "Bye, kids, mommy loves you." At that point, every cell in my body wanted to attack this woman, but I just froze. I literally thought at any moment I was going to wake up in my cruise cabin and this would all be some hellish nightmare. But it wasn't a nightmare, it was real. Crew members came to the bow in 2 minutes. They threw life preservers down below for the children to grab onto. In the meantime, crew members were hastily preparing to lower an emergency lifeboat to save them. This is something that I didn't know happens when someone is overboard. The captain of the ship signals a distress sound, letting the whole crews know the situation. This signal was blaring and the emergency lifeboat finally went into the water trying to save the kids. But even from this distance, I could see that the kids were floating motionless in the dark ocean. When the lifeboat was finally hoisted back up to the ship, the disturbing truth was revealed. Both children had died. And here's what still haunts my dreams. The mother was rocking on her feet, laughing and saying, "Oh good, no more children. I'm free." I could not believe it. When we docked at the port the next day, there was a battalion of police cars waiting to arrest this mother. I don't know all the details, but I do know that she was charged with first-degree murder. Her children were 8 and 6 years old. So yes, I know everyone has a different definition of evil, but I have to believe that this mother was absolutely evil. My sister and I are still traumatized to this day, and yes, my family and I will never get back on a cruise ship again. My greatest fear is drowning at sea. I have nightmares of being underwater with nothing around me but water. For many years, my family took a cruise each Christmas. We often sailed aboard Carnival Cruise, which has beautiful ships out of Florida to the Bahamas, our favorite destination. We also sailed other cruise lines that took unique ships to different destinations around Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and even St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. This chilling nightmare occurred on one of these cruises from Fort Lauderdale to St. Thomas. We were midway on our cruise when we anchored in St. Thomas. We arrived just after dark, and the lights of St. Thomas were beautiful off our port side. We entered the dining room with the best view of the harbor lights. We had a fabulous Caribbean-style dinner of rock lobster and my favorite, conch in a delicious rice dish. After dinner, my sister and I walked on the promenade deck that runs the ship's length outside. The air was warm and fresh, but the Christmas season still required a sweater at night. We started up on the bow and reenacted the scene from the Titanic, leaning out over the railing with our arms outstretched, letting the night air wash over us. It was a beautiful night with amazing stars above. I haven't seen so many stars as you see on a cruise ship. We finished our games of Titanic adventures and began strolling aft to the stern of the ship, letting our dinner digest. We were about 2/3 of the way to the stern rail when we heard these dreadful screams. "No, Mom, no." My sister looked at me, and I looked at her in bewilderment. What on earth is going on? We ran to the stern, where a woman held a child, maybe about age 7 or 8, over the back of the railing. The child was screaming. Then the woman released her, and we heard her splash into the sea 3 decks below. The woman was laughing dementedly and waving. My sister and I were not sure what had just happened. We were so confused. Was this a game? The woman, perhaps in her late 30s, was nicely dressed in fashionable cruise wear. Her hair was brushed but a little blown in the sea air. She was beautiful, except for the laugh. The laugh went from quietly demented to full-on hysterical. My sister and I looked over the rail where this crazy woman pointed. We could see in the black ocean water, just barely visible in the ship's lights, a child thrashing, trying to stay afloat while crying, "Mommy, Mommy." My heart jumped in panic, and my sister turned and ran, screaming for help. The woman remained at the stern rail, throwing kisses and saying, "Goodbye, dear. Don't forget Mommy loves you." She then roared with laughter, and not a fun, happy laugh, but one that bit right to the bone. It was so strange. She was waving to the child as if she was sending her off on the school bus, and at the same time, laughing like the devil himself. "Mommy loves you." I was terrified and did not take my eyes off the child for an instant as she drifted further from the ship. I was thinking to myself, this can't be real. This isn't happening. Seconds later, 3 loud blasts burst from the ship's horns, the signal for the man overboard. Crewmen were already racing to the stern with my sister behind them. One had a life preserver in his hand and an orange life vest strapped around his body. I pointed to the child and said, "There she is." He didn't hesitate a second but leaped over the rail and dropped in a splash in the ocean. The second crew member had a spotlight and lit the water. Somewhere aboard, a lifeboat was dropped into the water, and its engine could be heard coming fast. The rescue swimmer had the child in his arms. The deck was filling with passengers curious about what had happened. You could hear everyone saying, "Is someone overboard? Are they alive?" I didn't see the rescue crew bring the child aboard, but the rumor was that she was safe with her father. Ship security took the mother into custody, and a police boat came out from St. Thomas to take her to shore. Some passengers said the woman was telling everyone she passed, "No more children for me. I'm a free woman," and she would cackle that demonic laugh. "See you later, alligator. I'm free." I don't know what happened to the woman, but she must have been committed, for she was insane. My father invited our entire family on a cruise to celebrate May and his 50th wedding anniversary. May was my grandmother. It was my father, his brother's mom, and aunt with all the grandchildren. There were 10 of us for a 3-night cruise from Miami to Bermuda and back to Miami. My sister and I had never been on a cruise before, nor were our cousins, so we were excited. I was the middle age-wise at 13, my sister was the youngest at 10, and our cousins were 13 and 11. Since we all now lived in different parts of the country, we flew to Miami and met at the ship. We arrived first, so my sister and I explored the ship before everyone else arrived. It was a pretty big ship, but not one of the biggest. I think it had something like 1,000 staterooms, so about 2,000 passengers. There were 10 places to eat, 3 pools and whirlpools, a rock climbing wall, mini golf, a fitness center, an entertainment center like an arcade, and a massage spa. I'm sure I'm forgetting something. Don't forget a casino. So we kids had a ton of things to do and ran wild around the ship. Grandpa, May, my dad, Mom, and aunt and uncle mostly played gin rummy and mahjong, a favorite card game of May's. They thought we were responsible enough to stay out of trouble. The first 2 nights, we swam, watched Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in the movie theater, and played video games in the arcade. It was on the 3rd and last night that the scary event happened. The adults were playing cards after dinner, and we kids headed out to the upper deck just to watch the ship moving through the stars, which literally rained down on us like a magical world. We sat in the deck chairs and told scary stories, jokes, and stuff like that. Sometime around 12:40, we decided to go to the arcade. Now, it's a little surprising with something like 2,000 people on board. We were the only people on the deck, which was like a ghost town. When we got to the arcade, we had it entirely to ourselves. There was just one lone figure sitting on one of the deck chairs near the railing. As we passed him, I saw it was a very skinny and tall man with stringy hair, wearing a coat and a winter cap. I couldn't tell whether he was staring out to sea or asleep. It was too dark to see any other features. But he didn't look like the other passengers on the ship. We all felt a little uncomfortable walking past him. I was the last to walk past him, and I kept an eye on him the whole time, but he didn't move. As I passed him and breathed a sigh of relief too soon, I heard him speak from behind me. A second after, it wasn't like he spoke, it was more like he mumbled. I turned around, and he stood and walked in my direction. He was tall sitting in the chair, but when he stood up, he was taller than any man I've ever seen. He was ludicrously tall, he had to have been almost 7 feet. I don't know how tall, just really tall. My heart pounded, and I was scared to death. My sister and cousins were already in the arcade, and the door had shut. I was staring at this creep by myself. As he got closer, he pulled his coat around his neck, which was super skinny with a huge Adam's apple. When he was about 5 feet from me, he stopped, stooped over, took his hand out of his coat pocket, and, in an outstretched arm, held a voodoo doll. "Do you want to buy this?" he asked. I gasped, no, and turned and ran away. When I entered the arcade, everyone was already at a game. I chose Jurassic Park to play and quickly forgot about my scary encounter. I wish this story had ended there, but it didn't. As I played the video game, I heard the door open and felt the sea air blow across me. I turned to look, and the creepy voodoo man walked in. I instantly went to everyone and said, "It's time to go." We went to the lounge where the adults played cards and chatted with them briefly. They then gave each of us a hug and a kiss and set off to bed. We went down to our stateroom, and the adults played card games. We returned to our room without seeing the creep from the deck, got into our PJs, and curled up on the bunks to sleep. It didn't take long, and all of us were sound asleep. But at some time after 1 o'clock, my sister got up to use the toilet. When she turned the light on, she screamed bloody murder. There, in a chair, sat this strange tall man. When she screamed, he stood up, and all of us were up. I don't know how it happened, but he tripped on his own feet and fell into the bathroom. My older cousin slammed the door and placed the chair in front of it to barricade the monster in. Our parents, now in the cabin next to ours, heard the commotion and screams and raced over. We told them there was a scary man in the bathroom. They called ship security, who came and handcuffed the man. They placed him in a cell especially for criminal behavior. It turned out the man was not a passenger on the manifest. They don't know how he got on board without being spotted, but he did. It was suspected that he had mental disorders when they attempted to question him. He was locked in the cell below deck for his and everyone's safety. When we arrived back at port, the police came aboard and took him away. I don't know if it was to a jail or a mental hospital. How he managed to find our stateroom is a mystery. How he got into our room is my fault. I didn't lock the door. This happened multiple years back when I was around the age of 12. I was an only child, and back then, my family only had one car, which my dad would usually take to work each weekday. This meant any time my mom had to go somewhere while he was at work, she would either have to walk or hitchhike. Now, it should be mentioned that back then, hitchhiking was a lot more socially acceptable. Plus, at the time, we lived in a decently small town where, for the most part, everyone knew everyone. From what I can recall, this took place on a Thursday. My dad had dropped off my mom and me at the grocery store on his way to work. This, of course, meant we would have to find a ride back home. Though we'd done this many times before and never had any issues, only a couple of minutes into our walk back home, a driver pulled up next to us, willing to give us a ride. It was some guy in a white pickup truck who we had never seen before. He told us to get in the back, and we did. My mom started giving him directions to our home from the highway, but it honestly looked like the guy was just ignoring her. When we came to our exit, this was confirmed as he straight up drove right past it. The guy then went on to explain how he had to make a quick detour first. This was extremely unnerving, but after a while, we came up to a farm. The driver took out the keys, told us to wait in the car, and disappeared. My mom clearly didn't know what to do. I mean, we couldn't just leave. We were in an unfamiliar area in the middle of nowhere. A few minutes later, the driver came back, but now with a second guy. The guy looked at us and started flipping out, screaming at the driver. Now, I'm not sure if this is exactly what was said, but this is what I can remember. The guy screamed at the driver that he shouldn't have brought someone with a child and that there's no way anything can happen now. From what I recall, more things along those lines were said, but I can't remember exactly. The driver then got back in the truck and apologized to us. My mom sternly told the man to take us back to where he had picked us up. She technically hadn't given him our address yet and, for obvious reasons, now did not want that information known. The drive back was done in complete silence. Looking back, my mom and I both agreed that the purpose of that stop was not as innocent as a simple detour. We honestly see ourselves as lucky for making it out of that situation. We lived in that town for 5 years after that and never once saw those two guys again. This took place in November of 2005. Each year, my job would give us 10 vacation days. Seeing as I hadn't yet used any this year, I decided to take a week off to visit different states around the US. To get around, for the most part, I would actually hitchhike, which is something I've done multiple times in the past. Despite all the horrible recognition it gets nowadays, I actually really enjoy doing it. I've met a lot of people through hitchhiking that I still call friends to this day. Anyway, it was around 2:30 p.m. I was walking down the road giving the usual thumbs-up signal hitchhikers typically give. It had been a while since my last ride, and I'll be the first to admit I was getting a little desperate. Eventually, a red pickup truck pulled up next to me. Inside were two men, my best guess is they were in their 40 years old. One of them asked me where I was going, to which I responded. They both looked at each other for a second, then back at me, and signaled me to get in. They seemed normal enough, so I tossed my bag in the back, got in, and shut the door. But I quickly realized the whole floor of the vehicle was completely covered in different types of bullets. Before I had time to even rethink my decision, we were already going 60 down the highway. I tried to engage in some small talk to ease the tension, and it actually sort of worked. But somehow, the topic landed on how one of the guys had just gotten out of prison for aggravated assault. A disturbingly short amount of time later, they started asking me how much money I had. This is when I started to realize I could be in some serious danger. Now, I had been hitchhiking for a couple of days by that point. I didn't look the best, so I tried to play it off that I was homeless and had no money whatsoever. This response was met with complete silence. For the next 30 minutes or so, not a single word was said, though multiple times I would catch the driver looking up at me through the rearview mirror. I honestly just tried to ignore it, something I regret doing to this day. Fast forward 20 minutes, and to my horror, the driver turned off the highway and started down some unpopulated dirt road. I instantly shot up and said, dude, where are we going? After 15 seconds of no response while the car was still driving, I grabbed my bag, unlocked the door, and dove out of the car. Instantly, I looked up to see the red pickup slam on its brakes, shortly after followed by the reverse lights turning on. I cannot explain to you how fast I got up and ran into a nearby cornfield. I ran for 5 minutes when I swear I could hear gunshots behind me. They were clearly distant, but still, I ran for another 5 minutes until I reached the sign for the main highway. I then called the police, explained the situation in my current location, and waited in the cornfield until an officer arrived. I was then driven to the nearest police station, where I filed a police report. Though in terms of descriptions, there wasn't really much I had to give other than two men inside a red pickup truck. I hadn't gotten the license plate number, and I didn't even really see the full faces of the guys or even remember them. The whole situation was no doubt the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I don't completely know what those guys had planned, but I truly believe I could have lost my life that day. While I still hitchhike occasionally, I am now far more cautious in the cars I get into. It was a rainy night and I was driving home from my shift at the late-night diner I work at. It was a quiet shift at work. I had a weird amount of energy still, so I knew I was going to have to pop a melatonin when I got home. I was driving my usual route, a scenic road during the day but majorly dark at night, lacking many light posts. There are occasional little parking lots with cute little strips of stores or family-owned restaurants and shops, and then just stretches of nothingness. And by nothingness, I mean forest. I was passing one of the aforementioned parking lots of a well-known deli, and under a light post was a woman standing out in the rain with her arm held out. She was waving me down. I slowed as I realized it was a slightly older woman who appeared to be in her 50s, maybe. This woman was really tall, like 5 feet 11 inches or 6 feet, but very skinny. I lowered my window and yelled, "Do you need a ride?" She came over to the front door and opened it, chanting how much of a hero I am. I asked where she was heading, and she said just up the road to town. She was soaking wet, getting my car all wet, but I like to think of myself as a good person and I couldn't, in good conscience, leave another woman out there in the cold rain. However, picking up a random man on the other hand would be a different story. The woman seemed sweet, but I noticed as I looked at her while talking to her that she was missing a few teeth, very, very off-putting. I had to now wonder if she were homeless. She didn't smell or look like a homeless person, though, but the rain soaking her and her clothes could have been masking any scent temporarily. Plus, her hair was so wet that what may have usually been scraggly undone hair could now have been weighted down and straightened by the water. Either way, the woman was smiling the whole time and didn't seem like a threat. We pulled up to an intersection with a gas station on one corner. I pulled in next to a pump, might as well fill up. I asked her if she wanted anything from inside. I was really doing my good deed for the week. She said, "No thanks, honey," so I went inside to pay the attendant for gas and some spiked seltzers since tomorrow was the weekend. When I got back to my car, the woman was gone. I looked around the gas station lot real quick, but it was tiny, she was gone. She must have run off somewhere. I felt slightly bad, feeling like she was some lost helpless woman, but part of me also felt slightly relieved. I filled up the tank of my SUV and was on my way home. When I got back to the house, I went straight inside my apartment, which is the first level of a two-family house. There's a tenant upstairs and me. The front door into the foyer was usually left unlocked, then the 2 doors leading to each apartment were locked. I let myself in out of the rain and into my apartment. I set the seltzers down on the counter. I wasn't that tired yet, so I took a melatonin and tried to go to bed. Even with the melatonin, though, I was having a hard time sleeping that night. My mind was kind of going wild with thoughts, a lot of thinking about that woman I picked up earlier and what happened to her. At certain points, I heard slight sounds from outside of my bedroom, but I dismissed them as sounds from the upstairs tenant. Boy, do I wish I had been more suspicious before falling asleep. I woke up in my dark bedroom, something that usually would never happen when I take a melatonin. I usually sleep like a baby through the night. I sat up, feeling drowsy and really thirsty too. I reached over the table next to my bed for my water, and then I saw and heard something across the room from me. I saw someone crouched in the corner of my bedroom behind a clothing dresser, with their legs folded. I had to be hallucinating it. I shook my head violently and made weird noises. I even slapped myself in the face, and now whoever was in the corner stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't scream, I didn't say a word. I sat in my bed in literal shock. The part that had me questioning my sanity for a bit after the figure was gone was that there wasn't a single sound from outside the room after this, no footsteps, not the sound of a door closing. I grabbed my phone and called my dad. He picked up, confused why I was calling so late. I told him what I just saw, and he said, "Carter, you probably just had a night terror." I stayed on the phone with him as I was continuing to become more awake. I left my room and turned on the lights to the living room outside. It was a small space, there was no one in there. I looked around the entire space and could confirm no one was there. I started to believe that maybe I did just hallucinate it, but still, I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. When I woke up in the morning, I drank some coffee and got dressed for the gym. I went to open the door to the foyer and realized it was already unlocked. My heart sank. Last night, what I saw, was it real? I did another look around the apartment, confirming no one was inside. I went out to my car and opened the back door to put my gym bag in the back seat, and that's when I noticed the damp yellow-brownish stains all over the floor in the back, and my blanket that I always had back there was gone. I wanted to cry or scream. I figured it out. That woman snuck into the back seat last night when I was in the gas station. She either somehow unlocked the door to my apartment, or I mistakenly left it unlocked. I called my dad again, frantically asking him what to do. He said, check and make sure nothing was stolen, and if nothing was, then calling the police really wouldn't do anything. I checked the house and didn't find anything to be missing, just my blanket from the car. I skipped the gym that day. In fact, I stayed bottled up in my apartment for a while after that. I was just genuinely disturbed. I didn't want to live there for much longer after that, and so after that month, I found a new place to live. Out of the dark forest, I was hitchhiking from Liffey, Germany, to Paris. He was a French man, a somewhat dirty and unshaven driver, small and shabby. He agreed to give me a ride in his car, a ride with him to Paris where I needed to pick up. My paintings were from an exhibition I had there. It was October, I was 30 years old, and he seemed about the same age. He spoke broken English, I spoke no French at all. I really didn't have a clue who this guy was. The day was mild, sunny, and blue. It was a warm and comfortable French day, a great day to hitchhike. It was around 4:30 p.m. when I met him at a gas station somewhere in France. I hopped into his little old car, happy to have scored a ride. We drove off to Paris on the main highway. After some small talk, mainly about where I'm from, he reached over my lap and opened the glove compartment. He pulled out what looked like a bunch of passports. They were passports. He handed me all four. The first was a pretty girl who was his girlfriend and had died falling off the back of his motorcycle, he said. The second was a girlfriend who had died in a car crash. He told me the third girlfriend died from a brain tumor and the fourth fell off a horse. He said, I'm such an unlucky man. I agreed he was unlucky. The uneasiness started then and only grew as the miles rolled on. He was in possession of 4 young women's passports. Soon after showing me the passports, the man said he wanted to take a shortcut to Paris. It wasn't really a question to me. Excellent, I thought, get me out of here ASAP. I assumed we would cut through some charming French villages on secondary roads, past houses and farms, but no. Instead, we turned off onto an implausible dirt road off the main highway. Oh, I thought. Not good, but I kept silent. Why we keep quiet is a mystery, perhaps because of our dumb manners. At first, the road was out in the open through a field. We rolled over the typically vivid green French hillside until we finally reached the oncoming heavy woods. The road narrowed. It grew instantly darker as we entered the forest. The interior of the forest was creepy. The woods looked like the perfect place to hide something. I still found the woods beautiful and dreadful. It was at this point that my French driver shouted in broken English, I don't want to speak English anymore. This was definitely not a request. Then silence, uncomfortable silence in the darkening forest. I started to feel a small trickle of adrenaline in my body. My fight or flight instinct was warming up. Communication had now officially ended, just silence. I pondered this because I knew I would surely have questions as we would get deeper and deeper into the thickening woods. I knew, though, that I wouldn't ask anything. Nothing. It was now 5 p.m., and the sun was fading fast. The woods grew darker. The driver seemed so tense, and I could tell he was in deep thought. I noticed his lips moving almost imperceptibly. They were rigid, snake-like. I myself had moved my hand to the car door handle, a movement I'm sure could not have been missed. The car was slowing down. It did not say a word. Was I going to die now? Did he have a gun? All these questions ran through my head. My life was now surreal. This was not my plan. Maybe I communicated with my captor in some secret way. Maybe I gave off some kind of male pheromone perceptible only to men. Facing off, I possessed my own rage issues, and I was not going down without a fight. That I knew. There would be no begging or cries of mercy from me, not to this. I also had my own secret store of crazy. I was big and strong at that time, rode tough through my travels, and there's no substitute for my nothing-to-lose stare. That is all I gave him. Something very primitive transpired between us then. I think rather quickly, in a matter of seconds, it's a sort of inner calculus as to whether one can overcome, stop, or kill the other guy or not, and all its peripheral considerations, not the least blood, gore, strength, and alas, dying. I don't think these calculations are the same when a victim is small and scared, begging and weak. I think between those two uneven people, it just becomes bloodlust, power, panic, scratching, and doom. 5:12 p.m. The car was now moving really slow. I entered a very strange and new place in myself. I was transformed with very little preparation, transformed into a potential killer myself, maybe. My chauffeur could read my mind, or my body language, or sense my intent, or see my hand on his dirty door handle. It was the moment of truth, and then we suddenly started to speed up. Thank God. Out of those woods. Odd how these memories have come back to me as I write this. Some memories I'm not certain of. Like, did he say he had to hit one girlfriend with a shovel because she attacked him and would not be quiet and leave him in peace? Did he really explain the 2 backpacks on the back seat? Did I not hear that on purpose? Did I later imagine those words? Did I see more passports in his glove box than the 4 he pulled out? Why didn't I say, stop the car, after the passport show? The road began to widen, and we emerged out of the dark forest into the setting sun, dark red and orange in the sky. I could hear and then see the highway. Now I saw tiny houses across the highway. I had no idea where exactly I was. The Frenchman asked me if I wanted to spend the night at his house. We could eat dinner together. A quick film of his filthy torture chamber basement ran through my head. I politely said no. My first words spoken since the order not to speak English. I sincerely think that had I broken that command and blabbered something in the woods, my story might have had a different ending. It all came down to silence. I can be silent sometimes. One needs to be to contemplate the next move. Maybe one of the faces in the passports may not have been able to spring over her nature and started to talk or beg with fear. Would that have fed the killer's darkness as evil? Who really knows? I got out at the side of the highway, and with night settling in, I watched him drive away. I never went to the police because I didn't speak French, and I thought maybe my imagination was just too damn active. I yelled something into the night sky, just wondering what the hell had just happened. It was fully dark now. I was exhausted after that little adventure and soon fell asleep on the side of the highway. The next morning, I was worried about what the new day would bring. I looked at my hands, wondering if I was still alive. Jump ahead 20 years, and I'm teaching a German business student English in a cafe on a boulevard in Liege, Germany. For whatever reason, we discussed the topic of hitchhiking, and I tell him my story. My student promptly whips out his smartphone and Googles French serial killers. Then he shows me pictures. There he was. I was shown a photo of serial killer Patrice Allegre. It was him, all those years ago, me and him on that strange ride. I had never forgotten his face. At that time, in 1990, there was a reported serial killer leaving bodies of girls on the French roadsides and highways. He was in the midst of his killing hobby back then. I had heard about a killer on the loose. My French girlfriend told me to be careful hitchhiking. I've often wondered if the murdered women, other men may have been buried in those woods we passed through slowly. I now wish I had gone to the police and have since subsequently tried. He's in jail, and they're not interested. Maybe I could have helped stop more murders back then. That's heavy on my soul. Since then, I've felt the dark light in my body. Maybe the souls of the girls escaped with me, desperate to get out of the forest. This happened back when I was in college. Spring break had just ended, and I was driving from my parents' house back to my college dorm. The drive itself was about 3 hours. There were a few small towns on the way, but other than that, it was pretty much just endless fields. I started my drive late, around 10:30 p.m. I was still making my way out of the town my parents lived in when I saw a hitchhiker walking on the side of the road. He was a tall, skinny guy carrying a duffel bag. As I got closer, he stuck out his thumb. I honestly felt really bad for the guy, and seeing as he was walking in the same direction I was going, I rolled down my window and asked if he wanted a ride. He named a nearby town and asked if I was going in that direction. I was, so I told him yes and unlocked the door. He got in the front seat, and I realized right away that he was a lot older than I thought, like, at least in his 40s. He kept to himself for a good part of the ride, which I actually didn't mind. I had the radio on, so it wasn't just awkward silence or anything. It wasn't until around 20 minutes into the drive with the guy that I started to think I made a mistake. The guy started clutching his stomach while groaning and complaining that he didn't feel well. He pretty much just hunched himself in the passenger seat, swaying back and forth. I told him to feel free to open up his window for some fresh air, but he never ended up doing it. To say I felt uncomfortable would be an understatement. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand if the dude wasn't feeling well, but here I am driving while just next to me is this guy groaning and swaying back and forth. There weren't really any towns or rest areas nearby. I didn't want to just tell the guy to get out and completely strand him in the middle of nowhere, so I kind of just sat there, trying to focus on the radio. This went on for another 15 minutes when the guy said, "Dude, I really don't feel good. Can you take the third next exit?" This caught me off guard. Not the part about wanting to stop. I was more so expecting him to say that at some point, but the part about the exit. The guy specifically said, "the third next exit." I remember those being his exact words. In the moment, I obviously thought it was weird. If I myself were sick, I would be much quicker to want to just pull onto the side of the road or at least take the very next exit. I asked the guy if he just wanted me to pull to the side of the road real quick, but he sternly told me no. This should have been a clear red flag, but I ultimately reasoned that the specific exit he wanted me to take must have had a rest area I was unaware of, so I agreed. A few minutes later, I took the exit, but absolutely nowhere in sight was any kind of rest area. I started pulling to the side of the road when the guy said, "No, no, keep going. We should go down a bit further." Again, this should have been a red flag I picked up on, but I did what he said. Eventually, he told me to stop. He got out and, within seconds, disappeared into the darkness. I waited for the guy to come back for a few minutes when I saw 5 hooded figures walking towards my vehicle, only revealed by the light of my headlights. They were clearly carrying weapons and now charging towards my vehicle. I threw the car in drive and started darting in the other direction, but they actually started shooting at me. From what I recall, 5 gunshots were fired, 2 of which hit the back of my car. Even still, I was able to get out of there. I didn't stop the rest of the way back. I did call the police and report it, but I never got any follow-up. When I made it back to my dorm, I found the bullet holes in the back of my car. I think it's worth noting that one of them was only a couple of inches from my tire, which makes me think whoever was shooting was aiming for the tires, but I'll never be able to know for sure. I don't fully know the motives of that hitchhiker that night, but at least to me, it's obvious he intentionally lured me into that specific spot, which, might I remind you, was nowhere near any type of civilization. I have since never picked up another hitchhiker. This happened a few months ago, and I don't know why I agreed, but I decided to go with my friend Elias to a house party he was attending during our first year of high school, even though I wasn't even invited. Elias was able to pull some strings, and I accepted the invitation knowing that I wouldn't be able to drive. I made the choice to go with Elias. When we arrived at the home late at night, Elias told me to leave my phone in the car. He explained that maybe I could lose it or someone I don't know could try and take it from me while I'm not looking. At first, I was confused. I simply nodded, and we got out of the car. I went with Elias into the home's backyard where the party was taking place. I glanced around the backyard and saw people engaging in various activities such as smoking, drinking, and possibly even doing drugs in small groups. Elias had encouraged me to go mingle and say hello to a few people. After a few hours, I realized I had had way too much to drink because my vision was completely foggy. After getting closer to the house, I leaned against the wall to support myself. As I did so, I noticed the time on my watch indicated that it was either midnight or 1:30 in the morning. I knew it was time to leave, so I set out to find Elias. Despite my overwhelming need to collapse, I scanned the yard for him, but I was unable to locate him or see him. When I asked a few others if they'd seen Elias, they all said they had not. I decided to call Henry to find out where he was, so I reached inside my pocket to feel for my phone, but it wasn't there. I cursed myself in the back of my mind because I realized that I had left my phone in Elias's car. It had disappeared with him. I realized there was only one way to get home, which was walking. I remembered my house wasn't too far from this house, but the night was chilly because it was fall. I thought about just asking someone else to take me home, but I didn't know anyone else who could help, so I stuck with my idea of walking home in the darkness by myself. I then got to the road and started stumbling down the street. I knew I had too many drinks because I felt lightheaded and dizzy. A few minutes later, I made it to the main area of the street and kept walking. I lazily started thinking about a bunch of different things, like why did Elias decide to leave me alone at the party, or why I decided to listen to Elias's idiotic idea of leaving my phone in his car so I couldn't call him or anyone else. I started cursing myself for being so careless with my drinking and even getting drunk when I knew I shouldn't have done that. I stopped walking on the side of the road because I was getting tired and crossed my arms over my chest tightly to keep myself warm. Then I remembered something I could do, which was hitchhiking. I held out my arm and stuck out my thumb, hoping someone could see me. I watched as a couple of cars drove past me. They wouldn't stop. As minutes ticked by, I started feeling uneasy, thinking I would have to start walking again. It was past 1 o'clock in the morning, and there were a few cars driving past me, but no one was stopping because they either didn't notice me or didn't care. I hesitated and thought about walking home again, but I realized that in my drunken state, it would be too daunting. I was still holding out my thumb when a gray truck pulled up and stopped in front of me. I smiled as I stumbled towards the vehicle. The window rolled down, and an older-looking man with a beard asked me if I needed a ride. I told him yes, and then told him where my house was before getting into the truck, feeling grateful for the ride. As we started driving down the road, the man began trying to make small talk with me, asking what happened to me. However, I was too disoriented to have an actual conversation with him, and the only things I could manage to say were low mumbling or just murmurs and groans. As we turned the corner onto my street away from the party, I started feeling uneasy for some reason. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was strange about this man. Suddenly, we drove past my house, and I told the man that we had just driven past it. I felt my gut telling me to get out, but I couldn't because I was too drunk to move. I was about to tell the man to let me out before we got too far away from my house when suddenly the man turned to me, and I noticed he had a sinister look on his face. "You know, you shouldn't be drunk while you're hitchhiking because you'd make a very easy target," the man said, smirking darkly. The man reached over and started rubbing my leg. I didn't know what he was trying to do, but I knew it probably wasn't anything good. But before he could do anything else to me, we both heard a loud siren behind the car, and then a flashing red and blue light flooded the night. I realized it was the police, and I jumped for joy inside. The man panicked and stopped, unlocking the doors, which allowed me to jump out of the car. I ran as fast as I could, and the police officer rushed over to me. I told him the entire story about what happened to me. Unfortunately, nothing illegal happened per se at that point. The police officer told me that he was looking for someone in a gray truck who had apparently stolen something from a store. I'm not sure if it was the man who picked me up or someone else, but I was just glad the police officer stopped the car. A cop gave me a ride home, and I decided from then on I wouldn't get so drunk that I couldn't think straight. I now know the importance of being responsible and staying aware of my surroundings, even when having a good time. I was still in college when this happened. I went to a big party school in upstate New York. I wasn't in a sorority, but I attended a lot of the frat parties still. I had a heavy drinking phase in college, unfortunately, but I guess it's good that I got it out of my system. There was an upcoming frat party that my friends Verity and Ellie wanted to go to. I was not one to ever say no to a party unless I was already deathly hungover, and even then, I'd sometimes be known to still go out. I was living in a house off campus with 3 other girls. We were not a sorority house or team house or anything like that, just 4 friends renting a house together. I believe it was an Adam Sandler party that we were going to. The house was about 20 minutes away from campus. We pre-gamed pretty heavily at our house and then called an Uber, which we all split. On the Uber ride there, we pre-gamed some more, which was a recipe for disaster. By the time we showed up to the party, I was borderline blacked out. I barely remember the layout of that house. I'd never been to a frat party besides that night. It's weird, I have short spans of memory from that night. I vaguely remember the outside, that there were a bunch of frat guys standing out front of the house, and then I remember the DJ in the living room and the 2 beer pong tables in the kitchen. I was later told that I played beer pong with some random frat guy and ended up talking to him in a corner for a big chunk of the night. But after that, nobody knows where I went. I couldn't even tell you the last thing I remember before waking up sleeping on the grass on the side of the road. In a daze, my head was throbbing. I had to still be somewhat intoxicated. It was pitch black outside. I was laying by a bunch of trees, like a wooded area apart from the university. There wasn't much up there besides woods and the occasional little town. There were a couple of light posts further down the road, so I wasn't just laying in complete darkness. I patted down my pockets looking for my phone and had a meltdown when I realized my pockets were empty. I was also missing my crossbody bag. I had absolutely nothing on me and started to freak out. I couldn't even call for help, let alone check the time or where I was. I looked around the immediate area by where I was sleeping, nothing. My white shirt was stained with dirt, but that was the least of my worries. I started walking down the road closer to the light posts and began to realize there were no buildings in sight. I was on some completely random back road. I leaned on the light pole for a few minutes, wondering what to do. I decided I'd wait for someone to pass by and ask for help. It took a long time, though at least 20 minutes, before I noticed headlights down the road. I stepped out onto the road, waving my arms and jumping, trying to ensure I got their attention. The cars slowed to a stop on the side of the road. I approached the car, and the guy inside rolled down the window. Once he asked me if I was all right, I told him I was stranded without a phone and needed a ride home. He told me to get in, and I did, making sure to let him know how much I appreciated it. He, of course, asked me about my predicament, how I found myself stranded on the side of the road. I told him I was at a party, and the next thing I remembered was waking up on the side of the road. In hindsight, I should not have said any of that. I should have been as vague as possible and not let this guy know that I got completely trashed and was vulnerable. He asked why I didn't call for help, and I told him I lost my cell phone too. I looked back at him for a second, and this was the first time I really analyzed his features. He was about 40, not the best-looking guy, with a thin goatee and a big nose. I gave him my address to put into his house as he drove. He put the address in, and then I heard him say under his breath, "Okay, here we go." I asked how far away we were, and he said about 15 minutes. That sounded about right since the frat house was about 15 minutes from our house. I thought things would go smoothly. I'd get dropped off at the house where Ellie and Verity would be waiting for me with my belongings. But nothing can ever go that smoothly. The man spoke in a gentle voice basically the entire time. He was asking basic questions. At first, his soft voice was almost, in a weird way, off-putting, like why was he talking in an almost whisper in the car? We drove on and on for what seemed like over 15 minutes on the same road. I started to get concerned and asked him how much further we had. He didn't respond right away, so I said, "Sir," and he went, I repeated my question, and he said in his soft voice, "Not far." This wasn't right. Our house is in town, yet we were still on the same back road with nothing but trees everywhere. I started noticing in my peripheral vision that he would look at me multiple times, like he'd move his whole head to stare at me for a few seconds and then look back at the road. I was starting to feel sick. I asked him if he put the right address in, and he said yes. Then he asked, "What color underwear are you wearing?" as he put his hand on my knee and started rubbing it. I moved it away and told him in a desperate voice to please not hurt me, I just wanted to get home safe. He said, "Why would I hurt you?" After saying this, he pulled onto the grass on the side of the road and put the car in park. He was about to lean over towards me and do something, like put his arms around me, but I didn't let him. I opened the door and ran into the woods. Luckily, I was wearing my Air Forces, so I didn't have a hard time running in the woods. I ran only just enough to be out of sight from the car. When I could no longer see its headlights, I heard the man for the first time raising his voice. He yelled into the woods, "Where you at?" "I just want to." I put my hands over my mouth, not only to muffle my breathing, but because of pure fear. I waited and waited until I heard a car door slam shut and the sound of a car speeding off. I waited a few more moments before walking back to the road, confirming he was gone. I felt truly helpless. I didn't want to run into that man again, but I also needed someone else to help me. I waited just at the edge of the woods for another car to come, and eventually, one did. I saw the headlights approaching from afar, but I waited until I was sure it was a different car before jumping out and waving my arms and yelling. The car came to a stop. It was another man, a little older. I sat in the back seat. This time, I was so shaken up that I hardly spoke apart from answering whatever questions about my predicament he asked. Thankfully, this man dropped me off at the house. It was like 4 a.m. at this point. My friends were still awake waiting for me. They had my phone and my bag. They were contemplating calling the police if I didn't come back by morning. No one had any clue who I left with or how I ended up on the side of the road. The boy I was with claims he wasn't the one who left with me. In fact, there's no solid proof that I even left with anyone, but that leaves no explanation for how I ended up sleeping on the side of the road. I cut back heavily on the drinking after this night and never want to be in a situation again where I have to hitchhike. It was junior year of high school and it was the last day of school. A lot of people cut school this day or left early after lunch period. My friends and I were some of the latter. It was a stormy, dark day. A bunch of people from our grade originally planned to hit the beach on the last day of school, but that was obviously canceled. So my smaller core group of friends decided to do something else. There used to be an abandoned elementary school in town that hadn't been used for like 10 years. There were plans to tear it down by the year's end. So, still wanting to do something fun on the last day of school, we all agreed to break into the building and just around exploring. There were no cameras in that old building, and on a stormy day, no one would be outside monitoring the place or anything. So we all left after lunch period. Our friend Darius already had a car and his license, so he drove us all to the abandoned school. The school was in the middle of a neighborhood, not on any main roads or anything. There was a back parking lot covered by overgrown bushes and trees on one side and the walls of the school on two other sides. It was a perfect spot to park and go unnoticed. The place wasn't boarded up or anything, it was just locked up. Darius had a baseball bat in his trunk that he took out to smash one of the windows of the school. I was honestly so nervous that even through the pouring rain, one of the houses over the fence would hear the smashing sound. We all watched and nervously laughed as Darius swung the bat into the window in front of the car. After a few good swings, smashing it, he pushed away the stray pieces of glass stuck to the frame with a bat and then he waved us over. We one by one climbed through the window into the school. My logic was that the school was being torn down anyway. What's a broken window matter? We all were inside the building now. The window we climbed through was actually one of the windows for a classroom. A lot of stuff was still left in the room, including the desks and some decorations on the walls. Based on the decorations, it looked like we were in a 4th or 5th grade classroom. It was very surreal to be inside of what was once an active classroom where little kids would come to learn, now nothing but a cold, dark, and abandoned room, collecting dust, waiting to be destroyed. The sounds of thunder and lightning outside also added to the surreal feeling of it all. There were no lights on in the building. Power to the place was likely cut completely. We anticipated this, though. The flashlights on our phones were plenty to get around and see. Even without them, it wasn't completely pitch black in there, as even though it was a dark day, some light was still creeping in through the windows and doors. We started traversing the hallways, going from room to room. Each classroom was still full of desks and chairs that hadn't been sat in for probably a decade. We all 4 were in the same classroom when there was a sound that echoed down the hallway and into the classroom. We all went silent and turned off our lights for a moment. After a flash of lightning, we slowly accepted that it was probably nothing, so we continued on. We just went from room to room as our wet shoes all squeaked on the floors. Sneaking around wasn't really possible. A lot of things in the school were visibly decaying. You could really tell no one had stepped foot in there in ages. As we neared the corner of the hall, I turned around just to look back down the other way. At the doorway of one of the classrooms, it looked like there was something sticking out from the classroom. I asked my friends to also look. Their lights might help see what it was. When all 4 of us were pointing our phone flashlights toward the door, whatever that thing we were seeing was retracted into the classroom. All 4 of us quietly went, "Oh," amongst ourselves, and we started running down the intersecting hallway. We stopped when we were far enough away. It seemed we were in the kindergarten wing now. Then we heard another sound echo from down the hallway. It seemed we weren't alone, but who could be in here was the question. The place was locked up and every light in the building was off. The sound scared us into going into the first classroom we could find and shutting the door. It was indeed a kindergarten classroom. We were now concerned we'd get in trouble, so we waited in silence with our flashlights off. The rain was still coming down hard, and there was still thunder and lightning crashing every 20 seconds or so. Suddenly, the door to the classroom clicked open, and someone pushed it as it eerily creaked to a fully open position. We didn't see anyone at the doorway, though, and the hallway was almost pitch black. We all tried our best to stay quiet, and then slowly something appeared through the doorway. It was the shape of a head. We all saw it, and when there was another flash of lightning, we saw what it was. It was, in fact, someone's head looking into the classroom directly at us. I started apologizing for all of us, saying we're leaving. The person at the doorway didn't move. They motionlessly and almost lifelessly just peered around the doorway into the classroom. Darius asked, "Do you work here?" No response. Darius had to this moment clearly. He handed me the bat as he struggled to unlock one of the windows to slide it open just enough to crawl through. He crawled out first, then my other 2 friends, and I was last. Before I crawled out, I looked back one more time at the head at the doorway. I crawled through as quickly as I could, fearing I'd hear the person run up behind me and grab my legs. Once I was out, I ran to catch up with my friends who were already booking it back to Darius's car. We drove out of there in a hurry and never looked back. The building was torn down later that year and has since been turned into a park. We never got in trouble for breaking in. To this day, we have no idea if that was some kind of worker or just some random person. Either way, it was extremely creepy behavior on their part. My college years were some of the best years of my life. Don't get me wrong, I'm very happy with the life I live, but my memories of those 4 years are eternal. My advice to anyone still in college, don't take it for granted because it definitely flies by. I went to a beach college. Our campus was literally right on the water. This story takes place while I was undergoing pledge with my pledge class. If you don't know, that's basically a full semester of initiation for everyone who got bids to the frat that semester. Most of what happens during pledge is better left undiscussed. Anyway, it was the last week of pledge before we officially became brothers. Typically, this is the week where the fraternity kicks things up a notch, so to speak. For us, it was commonly understood that at some point during the final week, we'd have to undergo the beach challenge. Here's what would happen. The brothers would drive our entire class about 12 miles down the coast on Friday night. Then we'd have an hour to finish a massive keg filled with God knows what. After that, they'd walk us down to the beach, tie all of our wrists together, blindfold us, take our phones, watches, and shoes, and leave us there. We'd have until sunrise to make it back to the house, otherwise, we'd all be dropped. To be completely honest with you, I was pretty nervous leading up to this, but there was really nothing I could do. There was nothing any of us could do. I remember it being oddly chilly the night of, but the excitement of becoming a brother and finally being done with all this nonsense was adrenalizing. The kegs were the easy part. By this point, we were pretty comfortable with divvying up the alcohol and pulling trig if necessary. There were 15 of us. After tying us together, the brothers blindfolded everyone but Cuthbert, who was at the very front of the line. He was to be our eyes, but that's all the help we'd get. Our pledge master was this big Mexican guy named Gideon, but he insisted we all call him Steven, like the restaurant from Breaking Bad. He was a strange dude. He outlined the rules for us one last time, then joined the rest of the brothers and left. We were now on our own. I won't run you through everyone's names, but my closest friends in my pledge class were Cuthbert, Derek, Magnus, and Patrick. I was at the very back of the line, and Derek was directly in front of me. We began walking with Cuthbert leading us. It was hell. Without our phones, there really was no way of telling how much ground we were covering or how much time we had left. All we could do was keep walking. At first, we tried to liven the mood by talking and cracking jokes, but eventually, that got old. After what I'll call 2 hours of walking, we were trudging along in complete silence, with the occasional stop for someone to throw up. I started to dissociate. Even the sounds of the ocean grew silent as I walked along, trapped inside my own head. It was completely silent. Suddenly, I felt a sharp tug on the rope around my wrists. So I took a few big steps forward and stopped, assuming Derek had fallen. Derek was a little more clumsy than most, so this kind of thing wasn't super surprising. I didn't really have the strength nor energy to ask him if he was all right, so I just waited. I must have been standing there like a statue for a full minute. Something felt off. I was just about to say something when the rope around my wrist was pulled tight again. I resumed walking, pleased that Derek hadn't passed out. The trek resumed, and I drifted back into my zoned-out state, feeling terrible. I prayed we were closing in on the final stretch. We had to be. Just then, I took what must have been my 10,000th step, but something was different. Instead of hitting damp sand, my foot slapped the unmistakable thin layer of ocean water. I took a few more steps, and the water got deeper, reaching up to my ankles. I was confused. Why would Cuthbert be leading us into the water? The rope pulled tight again, meaning Derek and everyone else in front of me was continuing to walk, so I did the same. I guess I figured someone needed to wash off their feet for whatever reason. If no one else was complaining, though, I definitely wasn't going to start. The water remained ankle height for a while, advancing and receding with the sway of the waves. Just then, though, I felt the water begin to rise again until it was comfortably around my shins. Cuthbert was definitely screwing with us, which for the life of me, I couldn't understand. Why? Wasn't this stupid activity painful enough? The water was only going to slow us down. Seconds later, I began to pick up on a faint sound in the distance. I craned my ears and began to recognize it. It was the sound of an idling boat engine. As we continued to walk, the drone of the engine only got louder, meaning it was getting closer, or I was getting closer to it. I was starting to get really uncomfortable. The water was almost up to my knees at this point. Finally, I broke what must have been hours of unspoken silence. Guys, what the hell are we doing in the water? I waited, confused as to why no one was answering me. Guys, I asked again in a more concerned voice. Still, nothing. I could feel panic begin to set in. Suddenly, my blindness was suffocating. I had to look around. I reached my wrists up towards my eyes in an attempt to undo my blindfold. As I did so, the rope yanked away from me, forcing my arms back down. I cursed, plunging my head down towards my fingers and undoing my blindfold before the rope could be jolted away from me again. To my horror, Derek wasn't the one guiding me. Instead, I found myself staring at a random middle-aged man holding the frayed end of the rope tied around my wrists. I stared in shock at a severed rope in his hand, and that's when I realized what had done the cutting. A long, rusty kitchen knife sat in his left hand. Past him, there was a boat bobbing in the water, and I could make out 3 more silhouettes towering on board. I screamed bloody murder before he had a chance to react, yanking my arms upward as fiercely as I could. At the same time, I lifted a foot out of the water and kicked his chest with all the strength I could muster. Luckily, the rope broke free from his grip. He grabbed my shirt to try and cushion his fall, but the fabric gave way with a deafening rip. He yelled as he plunged into the water with a huge chunk of my white pledge t-shirt, but I was already moving as fast as I could toward dry land, my wrists still tied. A few seconds passed before I heard a splash from further away. Someone had jumped off the boat. I didn't even look behind me, I just kept moving. I was about halfway to the sand when something whizzed right past my head, maybe a few inches from my right ear. It was the knife. I watched it shoot past me before disappearing into the water. I was in complete shock, but the adrenaline was doing its job. I got to land and, for the first time, looked back. There were 2 men in the water and 2 on the boat. They weren't chasing me anymore, just staring lifelessly in my direction. The closest man was still holding on to the white piece of my shirt that had torn off in the fray. I didn't waste another second. I ran up the beach and made it to the street. By this point, it was past sunrise, but my frat was the last thing I was thinking about. I flagged down the nearest car, and after pleading to use their phone, I called the police. It was no use. By the time the cops showed up, the 4 men were gone, presumably off to wherever in that tiny little boat of theirs. I lied to the cops about what happened, worried that there might be repercussions for the frat. Luckily, they didn't ask questions. I didn't get too much crap from my frat brothers. They were actually more pissed at Cuthbert for not realizing what had happened, even though he swears he didn't hear a thing. After that, I became a brother, and things went back to normal for a while. A few weeks later, a couple of the guys and I were playing beach dice in the sand behind the house when Magnus noticed something in the distance. There was a stick poking out of the sand, and tied to that stick was the white piece of cloth that had been torn from my t-shirt. The design on the ripped stick was unmistakable. It was my shirt. To this day, I have no idea how they knew which frat I was in. My brothers think they might have recognized the piece of my t-shirt, but I have a more sinister theory. I think it's very possible that they knew our frat would be sending us pledges on that beach that night, helpless and blind. I think they very well could have planned the whole thing around that stupid tradition, swooping in and kidnapping whoever they could. I was just unlucky enough to be in the back, which still gives me chills to this day. I still wonder what might have happened to me had I gotten on that boat. The police, as always, were useless. It's been nearly a number of years. They never found anything. This happened to me about a year ago today, which is why I'm writing about it now. I'm a 19-year-old college student that was in the middle of joining a fraternity on my campus. I go to a big party school down south, and Greek life is taken very seriously there. For privacy reasons, I'll spare the specific details, but this particular night was my initiation, meaning the night that me and my class of 20 students would officially become brothers of the fraternity. During the process of joining, which lasts a couple of months, the brothers would make us do odd things like blindfold us and take us to strange places. You know, typical hazing stuff. This was one of those nights. We were blindfolded and left the frat house around 10:30 p.m. The brothers took our phones and drove us to a mystery location, split between a couple of different cars to make sure we all got there. On the way over, they made us try and sing some corny song while it blasted on full volume. We always had to do these annoying tasks while blindfolded, I guess as part of the whole hazing thing. Anyway, after about 20 minutes of driving, the car stopped, and I heard the doors open and close. I felt a hand grab my arm and silently usher me out of the car. We walked probably 200 feet, where I was then told to sit down and be quiet. I was sitting on grass, so I assumed we were in a field or something. I could also tell I was sitting near people because I heard them sit down, and I also heard the brothers telling each of them to be quiet. After about a minute of sitting in silence, I heard a voice speak to all of us, saying a bunch of fraternity-related things, but mostly about how we were deemed worthy of becoming a part of the brotherhood. Then, over the course of like 30 minutes, I sat in silence, occasionally hearing the sound of footsteps and movement around me. I figured they might have been doing the final steps of initiation with each person individually, like walking them away to talk to them in private. I didn't know for sure, but being blindfolded meant I was just left to my imagination. There was a time when the footsteps went away, and all I was left with were the sounds of crickets and leaves rustling through the night breeze. I began to grow uncomfortable, as it must have been like 20 minutes that I was sitting there in silence. Then suddenly, I finally heard the footsteps of one of the brothers walk up to me, and I felt a hand grab my wrist and lead me away. He didn't say a word, and neither did I. I just wanted to get it over with so I could take the stupid blindfold off. While we walked, I could feel the ground below me go from grass to more rough terrain. I could tell we were walking through a forest as I felt branches and shrubs scrape against my body. We were walking for some time, and at one point, the blindfold became very uncomfortable around my eyes. I told him this and asked if we could stop for a second so I could adjust it. He stopped and let go of me as I stood there rubbing my eyes from under the blindfold. I heard a deep, raspy voice say, "Take it off." I hesitated for a second, not knowing what to say. His voice threw me off, as it didn't sound like a voice I recognized. Needless to say, I took it off, and what I was greeted with was not what I imagined. I was standing face to face with some tall guy dressed in all black, wearing a vendetta mask. I let out a sharp yell and jumped back. A part of me thought this was just some messed up hazing prank, but before a word could even escape my mouth, he lunged at me, yelling that he was going to take me with him. We wrestled on the ground, and I could tell he was trying to choke me out. With all my strength, I threw him off of me, got up, and bolted in the opposite direction, using nothing but moonlight to guide my way back. My heart was beating 1,000,000 times a minute, and I kept looking back, fearing that he was following me. I eventually heard people yelling my name and nearly ran head-on into one of the fraternity brothers. I told him in scrambled, broken words that some random guy wearing a mask had led me into the forest and tried fighting me. But before I could warn them any further, 5 or 6 of them rushed past me with flashlights, looking to chase after him. One of them stayed with me to calm me down and walk me back to safety. When we made it out of the woods, I realized we were in a backyard, presumably one of the brothers' houses. I saw nearly the whole fraternity standing out on the porch, looking at us in shock. I asked them what the hell was going on. They said that since it was dark and I was the last in line, the brother who was supposed to be escorting me had somehow overlooked that I was there and completely forgot about me. They said a couple of minutes later, one of them thought they saw movement in the woods, which was around the same time that they realized I wasn't in my group. I was in such shock I couldn't even be pissed about it. None of them knew who that man was, but some of the brothers speculated it could have been a brother from another fraternity. Shortly after, flashlights emerged from the trees, and I saw them running back towards us. They told everyone to get the hell out of there and get back to the campus immediately. They didn't ask questions, they locked up the house, and one of them got on the phone with the police. The whole car ride back, I was bombarded with questions, and I answered them the best I could with my mind still racing. I wondered where that man came from, why he was wearing a mask, and what he could have been leading me to. I made up scenarios in my head, like how it could have been a brother from a rival fraternity trying to steal me before I was initiated. That doesn't explain why the brothers locked up the house and called the police, though. I didn't find out until the next day when one of the brothers who ran after him told me what they found in those woods, and what they found was not what I expected. As they were running, they saw a light in the distance. They grew silent when they got closer and realized it was a bonfire in the middle of a clearing. Standing around the fire were several people dressed in all black and wearing white vendetta masks, chanting and throwing things into the fire. One of the brothers stepped on a loud branch, causing all of the masked men to turn and face them. They froze up like something straight out of a horror movie. The mysterious men suddenly started running in their direction. They fled and made it back, where they told everyone else to leave and call the police. It seemed as though we had somehow walked ourselves into some cult ritual meeting of some sort. I couldn't sleep for many nights after and tried my best to rid my mind of the situation. However, something that I heard from the fraternity a few days later sent shivers down my spine. While a few of them were playing football in the backyard of that same house, they found a white vendetta mask hanging from a tree nearby. They called the police, and the cops took it for evidence and examination. I'm not sure if those guys were ever caught or if the police even made anything of it. I'm also not sure what the hell those weird people were doing in those woods. I've been thinking about this experience a lot recently, and I'm glad that I was left with nothing more than a crazy story. This was something that happened so long ago that a lot of details are a little blurry. It's not like it happened yesterday. I'll try my best to fill in smaller details that I don't fully remember with how I best remember things played out. It was the last day of school. I was in the 4th grade. 4th grade was the last year in our elementary school where kids had to be picked up by their parents. 5th graders were allowed to walk home on their own. My mom would always be the one to pick me up on the last day of school. My friend Dante and I had a playdate planned to celebrate the last day of school. Dante wasn't in my class this year, but we had been friends since kindergarten. He was in a different dismissal hallway from me. After school was over, we single-filed lined up and walked to the exit door at the end of the hall where we waited outside by our teacher, Miss Cayley. I waited for Dante's dad to appear from the crowd of parents shuffling in and out of the parking lot next to the doors. Then I heard my name, Titus, Titus. I looked over and saw a man waving at me. As he approached, he introduced himself as Dante's uncle and said he was picking me up. I went over to Miss Cayley and said, "I'm being picked up." She asked, "Where is he, sweetie?" And I pointed to Dante's uncle who waved at Miss. Miss Cayley dismissed me, and I went with the man. He led us through the crowd and was a very quick and jittery talker, like he spoke fast and had a bit of a stutter. He was walking incredibly fast. It was almost hard to keep up with him with my backpack on. He explained to me that his brother, or Dante's dad, was working later than expected, so he was driving me back. We got to his car, which was a dark red hatchback type car from what I remember. It took me this long to acknowledge the giant elephant in the room. Where was Dante? Why were we picking him up too? The man turned to look at me in the back seat and said that Dante was already at his house. I was shy around people I didn't know, especially adults, and I wasn't one to openly speak my mind if I was confused, but I was very confused. This was making less and less sense the whole drive. The man kept yapping, telling stories of his days in elementary, asking me questions like what sports I played, what we were learning in class. If I had to guess, we were in the car for about 10 minutes, which honestly, for our town where houses were right on top of each other, was a while. My house was a 5-minute walk away from the school, and we were definitely in an area I wasn't familiar with. When he parked the car in front of his house looked pretty normal to me from what I remember. He led us inside and shut the door, locking it behind us. It was really, really dark inside the place, and I realized why all the curtains were shut. It almost felt like it was nighttime in there, especially because the only source of light was a dim lamp in the corner of the room. He then looked at me and smiled. I asked, "Where's Dante?" and he started acting really jittery and nervous-seeming. He said something like, "Oh, I think he's downstairs playing video games. Give me a second. Wait here." He then disappeared into a nearby room, and I heard a door open and then footsteps descending into a basement. I know my heart was already racing. I knew I was in danger. I went to the door to quietly try to open it, but I couldn't. It had some kind of lock that must have needed a key. I really started to panic now. Yet, I still probably held out a little bit of hope that Dante would be coming up those stairs, but I knew the chances of that were slim. I regretted entering that house. I did the only thing I could think to do. I went to the kitchen and found a phone hung on the wall. I picked it off the receiver and dialed 911. The first thing I said when they answered was, in a whisper, "Please come to this house. I've been kidnapped." They heard me, they acknowledged me, but I didn't say another word. I hid the phone under a towel in the corner of the room with 911 still on the line. I hurried back to where the man left me as I heard his footsteps coming back upstairs. Then he called my name, saying, "Come down. Dante is down here." Then there was a pause. He repeated my name, and when I didn't answer, he came up the stairs fully to look at me. He asked me if I was okay. I felt so sick and was so scared. I hated myself for walking into the situation and not being wiser. I asked in a very scared voice if I could leave, and I remember the change in his face. His fake friendly smile disappeared as he realized that I was no longer falling for this. He walked closer to me in a gentle manner until he was close enough to grab my wrist aggressively, and he started pulling me towards the basement. I screamed and cried, and he screamed at me, "I'll let you go if you stop and behave." So I listened. I went down the stairs, and halfway down, the door slammed shut behind me and I heard it lock. I walked fully down the stairs to an empty, unfinished basement with a concrete floor and one singular support beam in the middle of the room. There was a depressing yellow glow in the room from one exposed light bulb hanging on the ceiling. If there was a place you'd imagine kidnapped children to go, this would be it. Med shut behind me and I heard it lock. I walked fully down the stairs to an empty, unfinished basement with a concrete floor and one singular support beam in the middle of the room. There was a depressing yellow glow in the room from one exposed light bulb hanging on the ceiling. If there was a place you'd imagine kidnapped children to go, this would be it. I heard his heavy footsteps upstairs. You could hear everything in this house. I don't know what he was doing, but I heard him walking around for a while. Then he came to the basement door, opened it, and called down asking if I'm hungry. I replied, no, not wanting him to go into the kitchen and see the missing phone. He shut the door and locked it again. I sat down there, waiting with my heart in my throat. Then I heard it, the doorbell ringing 3 times from upstairs, followed by banging sounds, which were definitely the sounds of police banging on the door. I refrained from screaming until I heard the front door open, but I never heard the man's footsteps approach the door. The doorbell kept ringing and I kept hearing the bangs. This went on for some time until I heard a really loud bang sound and then multiple heavy footsteps and multiple screaming voices. I started screaming for help as loud as I could at the top of the stairs, banging on the door. The door was unlocked, and a police officer on the other side grabbed hold of me and hurried me outside. There were at least 3 cop cars outside. I had to tell everything to 2 of the cops outside as we waited for my parents to show up. The man from inside was brought outside and into a cop car in handcuffs. That was the last time I ever saw him. When my parents arrived on the scene, my mom was bawling her eyes out. There had already been a hullabaloo at the school as cops were called and Dante's dad realized what happened. This man was a work associate of Dante's father. When he somehow learned that Dante's dad would be picking Dante and me up from school on the last day, he seized the opportunity to do what he did, a complete sick. I don't know how he found out what I looked like. As I got older, I never really asked for more details because I try not to think about it. My mom went to counseling with me for months after this incident. Let's just say my parents didn't have kind words for Miss Kaylee for not verifying if I actually knew the person picking me up. If I didn't think to call the police before he basically threw me in that basement, I know for a fact I'd be dead right now. This was like 17 years ago. That man might be out of prison for all I know. When I was a freshman in college, I took a chemistry class. It was really difficult for me. The tables were arranged in groups of 4. I sat at a middle table, at the left side all the way to the end. Next to me was a guy named Albert. He was very awkward. He gave me Reddit moderator vibes. To describe his appearance, he was like 5 feet 8 inches, a little overweight, and had a really ugly patchy beard, but he knew his stuff in chemistry. I think he was just good in school overall. We started to talk in a pretty cordial way when he noticed I was struggling in class. I would ask him for help, and he started offering to do my homework for me. He even let me cheat off him on tests. I never got any kind of flirtatious vibes from Albert, but that might have been because he was just too awkward to flirt in person. He eventually asked for my number so that he could send me homework-related stuff. Obviously, I gave it to him. He was helping me out a ton and didn't give off any threatening vibes. He just seemed a little reclusive. Fast forward to the last day of class, and Albert did something completely unexpected. He asked me if I wanted to go on a date with him after class. I had no physical attraction to Albert in the slightest, and our personalities were complete opposites. But he did help me throughout the semester maintain an A, so I had to let him down super politely. I lied and told him I was going away to Miami for the next couple of weeks and wouldn't be around. He right away responded, "What about when you get back?" I felt like 2 weeks was long enough of a gap in seeing each other where he would probably lose interest, so I said, "Yeah, I could be around," or something like that. He responded with a really cringy, "Cool," as he nodded his head in response. From here till the end of class that day was really awkward for me. After class, I left straight for my car and drove right home. I was a commuter, not a dormer, so after the last day of class was over, that was it. It was Thursday, and my other friends who went to the same school wanted to go out that night, so we hit town. At some point, I got a text from Albert. He asked, "When are you going to Miami?" I told my friends all about Albert while we were drunk, how he got me an A, but now he wanted a date. My friends joked that I should just go on a date with him to be nice. I joked back sarcastically, "Yeah, for sure." I told myself I'd respond to it later, but I was drunk and completely forgot. The next day, I woke up to 2 follow-up texts, one with question marks, and then the next one, "You're going to ignore me now that you don't need me anymore, right?" So I replied, "Hey, I'm sorry, I was packing. I'm going to Miami today." He replied almost instantly, saying, "Okay." Obviously, there was no Miami trip, but he shouldn't have found that out. Later that night, my girls and I went out again. While out, I got a scary text from Albert saying, "I thought you said you were going to Miami tonight." I almost dropped my drink when I saw this. I showed it to my girls, and they were all freaked out just like I was. I replied to Albert, "What do you mean?" And he replied, "Nothing, forget it. I just don't like liars." I genuinely was scared that I was being stalked. I looked around the whole bar, but he wasn't there, at least as far as I knew. So, what the hell, I just didn't answer at that point. I never planned on answering him again. It was until late that night, shortly after I got home, like literally taking my shoes off inside, that there were knocks at the door. It had to be like 1 a.m. I said, "Who is it?" And it was Albert on the other side. He said, "It's me." I wanted to scream. I was home alone. I yelled through the door to leave or my dad would come out and kick his ass. That seemed to work, as he didn't knock again. I texted everyone I knew about the situation, my family, all my friends. I was horrified. Some suggested calling the police. I said I would go to the nearest station tomorrow, but tomorrow didn't even come yet when I received a super long, disgustingly weird, and creepy text from guess who. I was appalled when I picked up my phone and read it. This is what it said: "I'm feeling a lot of emotions right now after being used by someone for months and then lied to. Hurt and anger are 2 of them. I thought from the start of the semester in chemistry class that our chemistry was through the roof, no pun intended. I must say I am hurt that you would make up something as elaborate as a 2-week Miami trip just to avoid going out with me, even after I stuck my neck out for you all semester and risked my own academic standing. I definitely have noticed the way you looked at me sometimes in class, and I can't pretend there wasn't a hint of interest there. All I'm asking for at this point is for one date. That's it. I'm not asking for your hand in marriage, though I surely would be quite an ideal husband to have if I do say so myself. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you needed more time to think over the prospect of going on a date with me. I know how much I have to offer, much more than these losers all over campus. If you want, I can come back to your house, and we can talk about it in person. I am only making this offer once. I'm just very crushed to feel like I wasted so much this semester for nothing in return. Yours truly, Albert. I sent this to everyone. I didn't care that it was 3 a.m. I called my dad until he picked up, and I told him how scared I was. After he read the text, he took it upon himself to send a lengthy text of his own and attempted to call him like 10 times, but Albert was clearly too much of a coward to pick up that phone call. I also went to the police station the next day with the text saying I wanted to press charges, and one of the people working there said that Albert would be contacted. Albert never picked up any of the calls from the police who were trying to get him to come in for questioning, nor did he answer any of their text messages. Albert completely disappeared. I never heard from him again. Between the police contacting him and my dad's pretty scary texts and voicemails, that basement-dwelling creep was probably himself. Luckily, I never saw him on campus again or anything like that, but I can say I know what it's like to deal with an actual stalker. It's been 8 years since I graduated from college. I went to Cooper Union, a small technical school smack dab in the middle of Manhattan. Going to school in New York City was amazing, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. We didn't have many frats back then, so I was sure to join whichever one I could, just to ensure that I'd have parties to go to and whatnot. I was a relatively normal kid, so it wasn't too difficult to get a bid. Most of the pledge events were pretty tame, but I would soon find out what they were compensating for. I hope I don't get in trouble for divulging the story, but it happened so long ago that I figure it's safe to talk about. I doubt my old frat is still making their pledges do this. I certainly hope they aren't. Anyway, the big thing that we did during our initiation was a subway crawl. I can't remember where exactly this was, but there was an old abandoned subway station that teenagers would typically explore. Our frat would make us enter from one of the active platforms, walk to the abandoned one, take some pictures, and then continue to the next active platform. We'd been given subway schedules to ensure that there was no chance a train would come around while we were vulnerable. We'd have plenty of time to get onto the abandoned platform, wait for one train to pass, and then make it to the next station. I know what you're probably thinking, but no, we didn't have to run from a train. The route was planned pretty well, and we all had a lot of leeway when it came to traversing the track. All we had to do was avoid the dangerous third rail, and we'd be okay. I had been a big fan of urban exploring before college, so this was honestly more exciting than nerve-wracking for me. It was some random weekday at like 3 a.m. when our frat brothers made us go down into the subway. I'm pretty sure they picked this time because trains were very infrequent and we'd be protected at all costs. There were about 10 of us. I'm telling you, it was a pretty small school. You don't need to know everyone's name, but I should mention that my closest friend in my pledge class was an Albanian dude named Baron. He's the funniest guy you'll ever meet. My friends and I always said he should try and do stand-up comedy. He also smoked a crap ton of pot, which is important for this story. The group of us made our way into the subway unscathed. Baron and I brought up the rear because everyone else was too scared to do so. It was really dark in there, and our frat brothers had only given us 2 flashlights to share. Those flashlights and a single cheap film camera were all we had. At first, I was entrusted with one of the flashlights for being in the back, but I quickly gave it up to one of my pledge brothers who was whining about not being able to see. Not even 30 seconds into the walk, Baron had his first genius idea. He pulled out a pre-rolled joint from his jacket and grinned, motioning for me to stop. "I don't have enough to share," he whispered, flicking his head in the direction of the other guys who hadn't noticed what we were doing. Against my better judgment, I obliged. Heck, when was I going to get the chance to light up in a subway tunnel again? The 2 of us smoked while we watched the other guys travel further away from us, their echoing laughter beginning to fade out. We finished the pot, and we were a considerable distance behind the pack. Baron's stuff was really strong, and I found myself a little more absent-minded than I wanted to be. My tolerance was definitely not as high as his. The 2 of us picked up the pace to catch up with the rest of the group, but Baron noticed something in our way. We didn't have a light, so all we could see was the silhouette of someone in the dimly lit tunnel. I strained my eyes a little more. There was definitely a person in there, just standing motionless in the middle of the track, facing us. It was honestly a little creepy. David called out, his voice piercing the silence of the tunnel. The person on the track didn't respond. Just then, David's voice called back to us from further up the line. The 2 of us froze. This person in front of us was a stranger. As if David's voice was some kind of switch, the person on the track started full-on sprinting toward us. The 2 of us turned around and bolted back the way we came. Being as high as I was, I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. The figure's sprint was eerily silent, as if we were being chased by a shadow. This guy must have been impossibly light. Baron's grip on my arm tightened, his goofy confidence completely gone. "Faster," he hissed, the fear in his voice mimicking my own. I knew we still had some time before the next train came, but running in the wrong direction just felt wrong. Baron must have thought the same thing because he frantically pulled me to the side, motioning for us to cross the divider onto a different track. In hindsight, we probably could have continued running back to the original station, but I was so high that I just followed Baron blindly. We made it across the divider and sprinted back in the direction of the abandoned station. Things were even more terrifying now, though. We had literally no idea when a train was going to barrel down towards us on this track, but at least we were heading in the right direction, I hoped. Baron's maneuver was enough to shake whoever was chasing us, but apparently it wasn't. Whoever was behind us also crossed the divider and kept running after us. The problem was, there were only a few places where the divider could be crossed, so we'd have to pray we found another one before a train came. Turning around to the one we just used was no longer an option. My heart was thumping, but Baron and I were able to widen the gap between us and our pursuer. We kept running, looking for a place to cross, but with no luck. Baron started cursing repeatedly, and I started feeling like throwing up. We kept running, still searching for a place to cross. Just then, the track started vibrating, and we could see light beginning to poke through at the distant end of the tunnel. A train was coming. We were screwed. I considered turning around and just fighting whoever was behind us, but then Baron screamed, "Right here," running toward the divider. By some miracle, the next crossing point was right in front of us, and the 2 of us crossed back to the original track. We sprinted another 30 yards and caught up with the rest of the guys who were on the platform. Baron explained the whole thing while I leaned over and threw up. Not even 30 seconds later, the train on the other track zoomed by. Baron and the rest of the guys were ready to confront whoever was chasing us. No one showed up, though. We thought the worst, but just then, we heard another crazed yell from somewhere in the distance. To this day, I still have no idea how that person avoided the train. We waited for the train to pass on our track and then sprinted the hell out of there. In hindsight, Baron and I probably just encountered some homeless guy who was drugged out and might not have even posed a threat to us. The fear took over in that moment, though, which I guess explains the stupid decision we made to cross over the divider. I'm sure the two of us also could have fended that guy off, but I'm glad we didn't have to.